Okay, Fox Den audience, the much anticipated Ready to Glare interview is here with Giulia-Christina, GC herself, the prolific YouTuber, mental health advocate, master's graduate of English, author. We could just go on and on. Fashionista on Instagram with wonderful. Listen, I can heap the praise on. It's not narcissistic if I'm doing it, right?
I mean, sure.
Right. Makeup, videos, great stuff. But of course, I came to her content because kind of videos that I watch are mental health related. And so like the algorithm sent me some of your stuff in the exasperated tone of just complete revulsion with society's horrific elements was so appealing to me. Perfect viewing for like Tuesday night stuff. Just wonderful. Love it. So thank you so much for coming on. This is going to be awesome.
Thank you for having me.
You got it. One of the reasons I started doing this is because kind of the same thing that you do, where you call attention to stuff that is less than okay, stuff that's pretty horrific, and just validate that this is going on. It's not good. It's just interesting how people have come to this sort of stuff independently, kind of a reaction to glossing over everything in our technological age here.
Well, and I think it's also that people kind of want to be seconded on the fact of when I think something and I'm like, am I the only person thinking this? So then when you put it out there and there are other people thinking it, there's a kind of comfort in all disagreeing with certain things that are going on. And I think it helps people feel slightly better that they're not alone in thinking something stupid.
It's really interesting because I was thinking about it the other day, because in one of your videos, you like explicitly talk about, I'm going to get upset about this and I'm going to be kind of not sassy, but, well, I think you've used that word before. Salty, some stuff like that. It's like,
yeah.
Well, you're serving as kind of like a Greek chorus back in the day. Like you're in a play and you've got like this, you're providing validation on a secondhand level for people. And it's interesting how like some things change with humanity and some things just stay the same, right? And our need to have some sort of reaction to stuff that's revolting, it stays the same because our disgust sort of evolutionary response is still the same.
Yeah, and I don't know. I just think that a lot of the time, for me personally, I don't know what other people are dealing with, but I'm surrounded with people that generally I don't agree with at all, which is fine. But it's also like when you are consistently around people who keep saying that you're wrong, you start thinking, am I wrong? Or do we just have a differing opinion and that's okay? So I think that going on the internet, a lot of people might be looking for like a refuge from that, like I am anyway.
Yeah. Extreme honesty is kind of the response to the real kind of veneer of everything's okay, very plastic. Yeah. Tell me some pet peeves that you have about the counseling or therapy world, if you have any.
Oh,
I hope you do.
I could. Yeah. Let me get my scroll.
Yes, get your scroll of grievances. I'm ready.
Well, I think that one of the things I've dealt with is, I suppose, an undermining of problems when they have to do with the internet. So, example, I was seeing a psychiatrist kind of to determine what medication I should be on. And I was having really bad nightmares. I've been having night terrors for years now. And they're all kind of centered on the same thing. And so he was saying, did something happen to trigger this? And I was like, well, my nightmares are all about home invasion. So he asked me if there was something that triggered it. And I was like, well, actually, I think so, because these all started when someone sent me body cam footage of the New Zealand shooter.
Oh gosh, yeah, you've spoken. Okay, keep going.
So when I told him that, I don't really like to be dramatic and be like, oh my God, can you imagine what I've been through? Because it's unnecessary. But at the same time, I thought it was valid enough to bring up. And he kind of just brushed it off like, well, no, I don't think that's it, without even asking any further questions. And that kind of left me a little bit perplexed, but I've realized that a lot of the times when it's something to do with the internet, it's immediately viewed as, what's the big deal? So even with other things that are related to the internet, example, I don't really care if I get death threats, but when it starts going towards my family, that's when I get a little bit
Ooh.
more on edge.
Oh my
And
God.
most of the time I don't really take them seriously because these are just trolls. But again, I remember I mentioned it to a therapist I had that I no longer see. I changed for obvious reasons. And even they were like, oh, well, don't take it seriously. And I'm like, well, that's really easy to say. But when you're worried about your family, and there's a reason to be worried because there were valid reasons for me to suspect they knew where they lived, that's when I was, well, you know, this isn't just a troll necessarily. So I feel like a lot of the times anything that's online is viewed as lesser, not an issue. I don't know.
Oh my gosh, to go off of that, that's an excellent point. I think that with the psychology community catching up to where we are technologically, we're going to see a lot more of that, and we're going to see kind of a sea change as people kind of our age, maybe some of the later millennials, and then absolutely when Gen Z gets into the profession, studies psychology, goes into the helping professions, whatever, you're going to see more realization that this stuff, that vicarious trauma, that imbibing this sort of imagery can cause effects that are, at the very least, slightly under real life exposure. I would go as far to say pretty comparable to real life exposure, because if you get into the traumatology of it, I remember I first reached out to you because you were talking about something, and I said, well, read The Body Keeps the Score. Okay, so that book. So Bessel van der Kolk, and I'll provide like a link to his stuff in the video for anyone interested. So he's like your quintessential MD, bearded white guy in a tweed jacket, looks like he could be at any school teaching as a professor, right? At like a medical university. But his story is interesting because he took that medical model, saw that it wasn't sufficient, okay, that popping a pill for everything isn't the answer. Not to pill shame. I think that is necessary to jumpstart the car of our minds sometimes, right? But we got to actually work on the body itself. Anyway, he talks a lot about yoga, Tai Chi, the therapy I do, EMDR, which we'll get into that, but he talks about how these things rewire the traumatic response. So when you see, and a lot of it gets into the neuropsychology of vision, and what you see triggering your limbic system, so that part of your brain that's fight or flight, and triggering your sympathetic nervous system, which is the body fight or flight response, obviously. If you're viewing a video and it looks like from your perspective, you're doing this to somebody, because I know, unfortunately, about the video you're talking about, or it looks like you're in this environment, who's to say that the neurological responses aren't the same? Because it's still incoming information entering your brain. Doesn't matter from what source if you're seeing it and it's like you're there, right? So actually, it's pretty irresponsible to not think about how your brain would interpret stuff. Doesn't matter if it's online, you're witnessing it and you're seeing it, and our brains are ancient in the way they function. So they're going to see it as something happening then. So it's not just online. If you were reading about it, or this were like a little GIF or something like from the late 90s, early 2000s, fine. But we are so immersed in these really high definition videos of trauma that they're pretty comparable to real life experience. It seems like that's kind of what you're getting at.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I was
with that, but I don't mean going through it, but I mean it's serious exposure.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing was, when I went, I never implied that it was the same, or like I never really put forth any particular feeling. I just said, I think in some ways this messed me up, essentially.
Right.
But that was, I think, discounted. I don't know. I don't even know if it was just because of the internet, but he immediately discounted that. And I just feel like, I think the central thing for me when I saw that was, there was so much news coverage, and so much of it was related to YouTube too, because PewDiePie's name was mentioned. So the fact that it was like in the community,
yeah, exactly,
added the extra layer. And on top of that, it's very hard to process when you see something like that and you see someone being shot in the head and you're like, wow, that person is actually dead, you know? Yeah, so it's even processing the small details. They're not small details, but the details of everything you're seeing, everything they're doing, as things that traumatized a bunch of people. Not me, but a bunch of people.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Is just, what do you do with that? You know, like, how do you wrap your head around something like that?
Yeah. Well, people who have a tendency toward empathy, and I hate using the blanket term empaths because I think that's overused, and it's overused by a lot of people who have possibly borderline personality disorder, and they're feeling for themselves, but interpreting as strong feelings. You know, that's a whole thing, by the way. But people like you who really legitimately feel a lot of empathy, are, when you expose to that, it causes those kind of recurring intrusive images and thoughts. And like you said, the details of it, it wasn't just a video game. You know that it was something real. And so your brain interprets it that way. It's very different than just online stimuli that's, is like from a movie or something like that. So anyway, that's a good pet peeve to have, that experiences that you go through that aren't necessarily on par with real trauma, in quotes, are kind of dismissed as, oh, that's not why. It could certainly be why you're having nightmares. Absolutely. Your brain. So slow wave sleep and REM sleep do a good job of consolidating memories and like helping us to put them back behind us. So if you're having nightmares, it's almost like a mental indigestion problem where you're not metabolizing these memories into long-term storage. So for anybody listening, please, if you're having intrusive nightmares, EMDR therapy, like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is very helpful in boosting that, because the delta waves that happen during sleep consolidation, slow wave sleep, we know are activated during EMDR. So, and that's another thing, is like if people just knew the therapies out there that could help with intrusive imagery, they could really get a lot of benefit from it. But you're just not hearing it. You're hearing like the live, laugh, love stuff and pills. It's like in between those two extremes of nothing but sheer medical, like pill stuff. And then, oh, just don't think about it, is some actual treatments that have so much empirical backing.
Well, yeah, and actually the fact that you mentioned that, the reason that I actually stopped going to that psychiatrist was because his solution to all of this was to put me on Ambien.
Okay.
And I had a weird feeling because he's like, oh, there are a few cases of people sleepwalking. And for some reason, I just knew, I had a weird vibe about what he was saying. So I started looking online. I tend not to trust online because who knows who writes articles unless it's like a reputable source.
Good.
But I remember I tweeted about it and I got like 200 responses. And out of those 200 responses, I want to say 90% of people were telling me how they crashed their car, how they start driving sleeping, how they eat in their sleep, how they've done all this stuff. And to be fair, side effects exist. Yeah. But at the same time, he vastly misrepresented the side effects, because he's like, only very few people. And I was like, right. Well, why would you prescribe that to someone who has, self-harmed and who has had suicidal tendencies? It just seems kind of irresponsible, because I could just go out, crash my car. But his solution to what I told him was just like, let me put you on a really strong sleep aid or whatever Ambien is even considered as. And I ended up not taking it because I realized this is not the solution. Like heavier sleep isn't going to make the problem go away.
Well, and it's very interesting because it's like alcohol for sleep, right? We know long-term, the kind of sleep you get, the quality from alcohol, from it knocking you out, is just not valuable. You don't enter REM sleep. It doesn't restore you and refresh you. And you get really nerdy with that, looking at how it doesn't do it doesn't do the job that sleep's intended for. So it's very astute of you to do your research and be an informed consumer.
Well, yeah, and I think it's also a question of kind of the culture where I live in Orange County.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be stereotypical, but it is very much known for having doctors who prescribe things not because they should, but because a patient asks for it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that's part of my issue as well, is that I'm in an area where that's kind of expected almost.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a pill mill type thing where you kind of get the ability to ask and like drive through and order what you want. I mean, I've heard that for sure.
Well, I remember the psychiatrist prior to this one, which was another interesting experience. I met her for we were supposed to have a 1-hour session where she'd figure out what to prescribe me. We ended up being in there for 15 minutes. And she prescribed me Seroquel. And I ended up being on Seroquel for a while. And every time I went, she'd keep upping it to the point where I grew a tolerance to all Seroquel, where it doesn't work on me at all anymore. Like I don't, no matter what dose. But that was because she kept upping it with no regard. Like I'd see her for 5 minutes and she's like, let's just up the dose. And I was like, this doesn't seem like a good thing to be doing.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. I mean, Seroquel's not the like first resort pill usually. I mean, I don't know, it's pretty intense. It can be intense.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I used to wake up and I'd stay groggy for like half of the day before I turned back to my normal self.
Okay. Well, sedation is not always the best path to mental health either. What has been, if you can remember this, like the most disturbing case, and of course I'll put like a content warning before this whole video, but like that you've reported on with your, obviously the shooting, that was terrible.
The most disturbing, let me think a second. I think one of the most disturbing ones, and I actually had to take down this video because it was too much. Like I just didn't want to have it up anymore because it disturbed me too much.
Okay.
Was a case about I can't remember his name right now, but it was about a man who was very invested in his congregation, and he was like a puppeteer for like Sunday mass, but for children.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And he was like a cannibal. And so like there were recordings of him talking about how like he wanted to eat one of the children who were part of this like congregation thing. And I think that one hit me more because I actually heard audio recordings of him talking to another cannibal about what they would do.
Oh my God. Okay.
And because you hear the voices, I think that one hit me a lot compared to if you see it written. It's still terrible, but it's written. It's not like you're hearing the intimate conversation someone's having about butchering someone, essentially.
Yeah, that's pretty terrible. Oh my gosh. Okay. So you took that one down because it just was very unsettling and you didn't even want to have any part of that.
Well, I think it was more because after hearing the recordings multiple times, because obviously I had to remember and internalize what was said and why it matters, blah, blah. I just felt like it was one of those things that I just didn't really want to put out there because I felt like it probably was a lot heavier than a lot of other things. And it was just too many. I guess it was overlap of too many things I find creepy: cannibalism, partial pedophilia, being murderous, just like too many things that I think make people uncomfortable, and it was too much for me anyway.
Right. Oh my gosh. I mean, one of your recent videos, The House of Horrors, so for anybody, just type that in, well, or don't if you're going to be triggered by it. But I mean, the lack of empathy there with that dad who worked for the police and then the stepmom toward that son freezing in the garage. I mean, there's such a callousness to that makes it appalling. That seems to be like the component of something not being out of revenge, which is still terrible, but the kind of unrelatability of the callousness and what's been known as the banality of evil, meaning it's just so banal, so callous and everyday almost. Like that seems to be the worst stuff, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's why that case was so jarring to me, because they seemed so just blasé about it. Like they were talking about, hey, put out the food for the cats. Hey, our kid's dying in the garage. It just seemed like a run-of-the-mill conversation. I think that's why it was so terrible, because you start wondering if this is run-of-the-mill, then what else, have they done without texting about it?
I completely understand that. Yeah. I mean, and the evidence there too, from the text, as you brought it, like the way, oh, it would be nice if he had a bathroom. Well, you have a fucking bathroom there. So maybe like that's what kind of game are you play? I don't know. I mean, for parents out there, you've got to be really, and that was the biological dad of the kid. But there's a lot of research that with step parent families, there's nothing wrong with it, but you've got to be really careful because there's not always the same investment. And when you get a bad biological parent, and a bad step parent, that's just a catastrophic cocktail waiting to erupt.
Well, certainly in this case. And I guess it was also a question of there were so many signs, which I think that's what frustrated me the most, is like the kids were severely underweight. They were always hungry and all this stuff that just makes you think, really, was this not avoidable, So
that's a good point. That brings me to the fact that CPS is sometimes they're inundated, but when you have repeat reports, as was in this case, and there's clear, obvious neglect, I don't really know what you're waiting for at that point. because there's all the information that's actionable there. As a therapist, I would have to report that stuff unequivocally, and I've had to report stuff like that before. So if who I'm reporting to isn't doing anything about it, that's cause for alarm, because that's the only option I have as someone who's an advocate and someone who's actually professional in the field, is to defer it and kick it to the government like that. And so if they're not doing anything, then it makes complete sense why this shit keeps happening.
Yeah, and I suppose the other part is that in a lot of other cases that I've seen that were like this, there wasn't footage, or it wasn't obvious. You know, the teachers didn't notice, there wasn't footage, there weren't text messages. But here, they have footage from inside the household, you know? So it's kind of would have been open and shut, which is, I think, why so many people were so angry, because it wasn't even one of those gray cases where you can see both sides. It's more like, okay, well, we have the conclusion. Everything leads to they're guilty. They're obviously abusing their children.
Right. Oh, man. I want to kind of pivot and ask you about like your favorite music, and I'm sure you've interspersed it in the videos, but like what, or maybe not, I don't know.
No, because anytime someone asks me like, what's your favorite genre? I'm kind of like, fuck, like, I don't know what to tell you.
Do you spread the gamut there? Do you range?
I mean, as long as it's not country, I'm probably okay with it.
I'm from the South, and I don't really like a lot of country except like the old school Johnny Cash stuff.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, like, I don't even think of that as country, because now I've been internalized with countries, like talking about pickup trucks, beers, and like the girl your mama likes. No.
Oh, spicy.
I can't with that. It's too much. But I do like, I grew up on Queen and like David Bowie, just very classics, I suppose. So like, I really love those because they're nostalgic to me. Yeah. But in terms of my own, I tend to gravitate towards depressing music. Lana Del Rey or Billie Eilish, I really like. Also because Lana's nostalgic to me. But I think I'm a little bit all over, because I also enjoy rock music, but I feel like I tend to have very particular, I have to listen to a certain music only if it matches the mood. So I can't listen to Lana unless I'm in mood X. I can't listen to David Bowie unless I'm in mood Y. So sure. It's very much in waves. Like I'll go months without listening to certain musicians.
How about Lil Peep? I saw him twice before he passed away.
I like Lil Peep.
Fucking awesome. I'm really sad. See, it's like, damn it. If somebody had talked to him and helped him to get some treatment for that addiction, that fentanyl laced stuff I mean, that's just such a preventable death. Oh my God.
Well, and it's funny because a lot of the musicians I enjoy a lot of the musicians period have had addiction problems, but even Lana Del Rey, she had addiction problems when she was younger and got the help. Like I think when she was 14, she was an alcoholic, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And that was one of the times where it actually worked out and she got past that, and that's fantastic. But the reason I remember it is because she's one of the few that, you know, don't succumb to it, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I grew up listening to Nirvana. I loved Foo Fighters, you know, listening to them. And of course, The Cure. Oh my God. I could listen.
Yeah, the Foo Fighters were for me too. The Foo Fighters, yeah.
Dave Grohl, he made it.
Yeah.
It was tragic that Kurt died, but Dave Grohl made something beautiful himself after it. So
yeah, it reminds me also the Red Hot Chili Peppers, like I listened to a lot growing up.
Yes.
I suppose a lot of their sounds, like all the bands we've mentioned, are somewhat similar, or like the themes of their songs are somewhat similar.
Right.
I think I just gravitate towards the message more than the music now that I think of it.
Nice. That's awesome. Okay. I appreciate you retweeting that list of things to talk about, because I'll get to that now, timestamp it. But those were some really good questions that I tend to get a lot from actual clients too. And I've spent so much time deprogramming clients from bad therapy they got in the past. Bad therapy is far worse than none, because you have to unlearn that. You have to unlearn what is expected, like what's reasonable to expect from someone that you're paying or your insurance is paying to help you. I mean, that's just tragic. So kind of like, go ahead.
No, I was just going to entirely agree. I'll pull up the questions people asked on my phone.
Are you sure? I was going to pull it up, but if you, I love the phone case. And I know that's one of your sponsors, right? Case of
Yeah.
So I actually love the marble, like golden marble aesthetic. When my office is all done, I'm going to have like a backdrop on, like that's going to be the whole way I go because.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. It's such a nice, clean one. Yeah.
Hey, mental health can have a luxury look to it. Let's destigmatize it and get out of this like quilted pillow and whispering voices aesthetic, because that shit ain't for me.
No, it's not for me either.
Some people, but I've had clients who are like singers and like obviously I'm not breaking any HIPAA rules, but I tend to get a lot of clients who like that crap wouldn't work. Well, of course they're sent to me, but it's that wouldn't work. That sort of approach that seems very processed and almost like you're talking to a caricature of a person. Like you're talking to someone who is pretending for you to, it's like, no, let's get authentic about it, because I can be professional enough while also validating you. And you clients curse. And it's funny when they're like, oh no, I'm sorry I said that. I'm like, don't be sorry. You don't know me.
Well, I think it's nice too to go to an environment that doesn't, like for me, any environment that seems clinical where I'm supposed to have therapy, I automatically feel like I'm in a hospital, and that just makes me feel uncomfortable. Whereas I think it would be nice to go to like someone's office and have like some of their personality, whether it's wallpaper or like a poster or whatever the hell. Absolutely. I'd rather that than just sit in front of someone and be like, I have no idea who you are.
Who are you? Yeah, exactly. Okay. We can get some questions now if you want to.
Sure. Was there one that you particularly gravitated towards, or?
We could go in order if you want.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Okay, so the first one says, as an outsider who has friends who struggle with mental health, what is the best way to stop being paranoid or feeling overprotective of them? I'm always aware that I can't do squat, but the irrational part of my brain still tries to convince me I could. Yeah. And then it continues and says, and I have to literally refrain from sending more than a single, hey, thinking about you / I'm here for you text, because I hate seeing my friends in pain. And some protective nature wants to help until they're okay, but that's not how it works. But my brain doesn't get that.
Okay. First off, what are your thoughts on that? Because somehow I'm thinking you may have some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I relate to it because pretty much every single friend of mine at one point has been suicidal, and all of my friends live on different continents. Like my best friend lives in another continent, another close friend lives in another continent. So it's not the question of, hey, let me pop in and check up on you. It's more like, if you're not answering your messages, there is nothing I can do. And that can be overwhelming, because I know that there's nothing I can do aside from being there and letting them know I support them and potentially giving them advice on going to see a doctor or something. But that helplessness I feel like is super prevalent with people who have like online friends or friends who live in a different state. And that's what it made me think of, because you can't just pop in and check.
Beautiful. So when I hear that, I think, okay, so there's some attachment stuff going on there. As a friend, you want to reach out. And if you're not hearing back, there's that anxious attachment component of you start to see that you're not hearing back. Your heart rate goes up. You feel that tension in the chest that I hear so much from clients that comes from kind of your fight or flight response ramping up. Your sympathetic nervous system starts to peak there. So sometimes you can't, this is something I say to people a lot, is you can't always think your way out of a bad mood. That's where people get stuck a lot, is you're not gonna be able to logically think to yourself, I know my friend's okay. That's not going to work, because you don't, sadly. But what you can do is tell yourself, okay, I've reached out. Maybe I'll send another text. Okay, but that's it. I'm noticing in my body that I'm tense right now. I'm going to slow down my breathing. I'm going to use the Calm app. I'm going to use something a therapist taught. I'm going to use square breathing, which is like inhale for 4, hold that inhale for 4, exhale for 4 seconds, and then hold that exhalation like before you breathe in for 4, and you repeat it. I guarantee if you do enough of that, like if you do that for a few moments, you'll start to calm down. But your response to that attachment, to wanting to outreach that friend, is very visceral. You can't have anxiety without the body. That's worry, the thoughts, the worries charge your body to feel tense, and then that goes back to your mind, and it's a feedback loop. So for people who are feeling that way, your empath side, your thoughts, okay, are going to want you to do as much as it takes to outreach your friend. So text them, call them, whatever you can do. And then then the painful journey of reprogramming your response, that once you've done what you can to breathe and to quell your anxious nervous system, that's where a lot of that work is going to get done, because you have to see the forest for the trees. As an empathic person, you're going to get upset about this stuff, but I guarantee the more you train your brain that you've done what you can, it's not going to be easy the first time, but the more you do it, it is going to get better. I've done this with people before. I get a lot of people coming in. The people who come in for therapy are often the ones who don't need it, in the sense of they've got relationships in their lives that they're burned out by, right? Like, they're well-intentioned people who need to learn better how to manage their own empath anxiety. And so what you have to do is look at it as a system, a whole body system problem, versus just thoughts. It's never just thoughts. It's always that feedback loop of the body and the brain. So please recognize that when you start to get anxious, it's not just your thoughts. Put the phone down, go for a drive, put on some good music, go do one of your, and this is why it's so important to have good coping skills. If you don't, then you're going to sit and you're going to look at the phone and worry about your friend. You've got to get that mental imagery out by crowding it out with something else that's really helpful and that immerses you in it. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, you touched on the point that a lot of people, I don't think, have the right coping mechanism. So then when
Sure.
when you tell them, do something else, it's like, well, what? And, that's something you have to figure out yourself, or with your therapist. You need to figure out what works for you. Because I know it took me a while to find something that actually worked in terms of getting my mind off something and just moving past whatever happened, with my friend that I can't help more.
Yeah. And, it's such an important thing to keep in mind. Like, here's something else that I like to talk to people about. It's never your fault that you had trauma, ever. It's always our responsibility what we do afterward. And that sucks. And so I give clients as much time as they want to bitch about that. Like, that's so fucking unfair. Can't believe it. I have to be the one to fix what somebody did to me. Yes. With my help, with a therapist's help, right? That's really the therapist's job. You can read this stuff on your own, but you need somebody to bear witness to it and help you rebuild your life, because we're the only ones who can rebuild our own lives. So looking for those coping skills and being curious about your own values and enjoyment, like, in the fact, because trauma really hits people in a way that it's forced vulnerability, right? And you feel invaded, and you can even lose touch of your own values and what you enjoy doing, right? It's like intense depression hitting mixed with anxiety. So get back in touch with what you enjoy, and I guarantee you'll be able to draw on that when you're anxious, and you'll be able to it'll give you a boost in desensitizing your anxious nervous system. So
yeah, I completely agree. Should we move on to the next question?
yes.
Okay, so it says, I needed to find a psychiatrist, so when I went to therapy, my therapist and I made some phone calls, and I had to do a pre-qualification screening. Some guy on the phone basically asked me to explain every traumatic event in my life. Then after 20 minutes of waiting on hold, he said I need a medical eval/change since I haven't been rechecked by anyone since 2012, but I need a psychiatrist to do that.
Okay. So one of the big things there is this sort of left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing, where we have kind of a failure of this integrated care system. So I remember reading that in particular and thinking, well, I'm glad I'm going to be talking about this on video, because it's easier than texting the whole thing. So onto Twitter. So as much as you can, and I can even outreach this person in particular, but from what I understand, that might have been like some kind of a community mental health center deal where you have to have a psychiatrist's approval for something. That's what it's saying. So what I would say about that is look in your area for resources depending on your insurance. So insurance is a big hurdle for people. So fun fact, when you start out as a therapist, you're interning, you provide free services because you're getting your feet wet, you're helping people, you're getting something out of it because for school you have to have internship and people are getting something out of it. I mean, hopefully you're good enough helper starting out even, and you're not screwing people up. But so if you look into like a clinic, so I don't mean to, now I know many people have different views on religion and things like that, but a lot of the sort of clinics that are free or places where you can get free therapy are going to be Christian or spiritual in nature. So again, if somebody is decent enough, a therapist in training, a lot of them are told, like, if don't convert people if you have clients coming to you, right? It's like, so you can find something like that. Try to find someone who has a sliding fee scale. That's a big thing you don't hear about a lot. I know where I work and in my own personal practice, I will do that. Like, a lot of places will show, if you can't afford, like, proof of your monthly paycheck, right? And people will like say, okay, your rate is reduced. I mean, I'm just thinking of ways you can get out of this whole insurance game if you're trying to get help and you don't want to have to go through all these hoops. There's a real lack of people who going into psychiatry. So there's a shortage, even like an epidemic shortage of psychiatrists, okay, and even psychiatric nurses. So be aware of that. And if you need to go to look up community mental health in blank in your area, because in most counties, there will be like a regional network. It's probably like that in California too. Like, you've got a few places that kind of have the same brand, but they're all the same kind of, they're satellite facilities.
Yeah. I mean, like for me, I was, because of my insurance, after I went to the ER due to a panic attack, and they ended up calling me back, the insurance, and they ended up setting me up with like a community center type thing that's like addiction and therapy.
Yeah.
That's what they set me up with. And I know that a lot of people go specifically to mine because they take all types of insurances where people essentially don't have to pay crazy amounts to get therapy. So, and it's a community place. So It's definitely worth checking out.
That's what I'm talking about. So those places, say what you will, there can be like long wait times to get in, but once you're in the system, since it's multifaceted, there's less chance for you to totally fall through cracks. And when you call back, you can usually, if you stay on it, you can usually get in for an intake appointment where you get in and you get an assessment, you get a diagnosis, because playing the insurance game, you need a diagnosis to charge your insurance. So that's fine. But that's why all these intakes are required. And the person on the phone making you relive that stuff, I'll speak to that and say, sounds like it was a phone intake session, but it should have been explained enough that, hey, I have to ask you some questions to prove to your insurance that you're here for treatment. Please bear with me. Just that short of a description of what you're going to do to somebody, it really doesn't effing take that much. So from that responders, from that Twitter user's little tweet, it sounds like they didn't get any bedside manner. They didn't get any positive sort of, here's what's happening, and I get that people do the same job and they don't think to explain it, but it's not really an excuse when you're in the mental health field, because part of your job is knowing to tell people what's part of your job. It's like your whole job is to make people feel to an extent comfortable, right?
Yeah. I mean, I figured they would have at least explained why they need to ask certain questions instead of just asking them, just like a tiny preface that takes 10 seconds to say.
Yeah. Okay. So that was a good one. That's a tough one, because that speaks to the kind of problem with healthcare and with how complicated mental health care can be to get. Based on your insurance, you'll need the validation of a psychiatrist or not. For everybody listening, be aware, if you're on Medicare, which isn't just for older people, it's also for younger people who have like severe disabilities. If you're on that, good luck. And if you know what to expect, it's a little easier. So you have to usually have a doctor on site. That's what I'm guessing is going on there. If I'm going into it cold, just reading that, is she's with a particular kind of insurance where they won't play ball unless you've got a doctor. Now, the good news is you can get you can see one once and they'll say, okay, I write off on this. And then that's it. Like yearly, you have to re-up that, but that's not that bad if you get in there and you keep, I don't know. Okay. Next question.
Okay. It says, this is kind of in the same vein. It says, what do you do when you believe you've exhausted all your options for help, yet still can't find the thing that's actually helpful for the long haul?
Okay, very general. I like it. So one of the big things you can do is, this sounds so very glib, but seeking help, looking up like what kind of therapy works for whatever condition you have. See, here's a chicken and the egg problem, because let's just get to this one. Let's combine some questions. So somebody asked, what do I think about self-diagnosis? I think it's a real double-edged sword, to put it mildly. I think if you know something's wrong, because it's like, well, how do you not know to get help if you don't know something's wrong? So I'll give an example. It's like let's say that you are losing track of time and you think you have schizophrenia. Okay. Oh my God, no, I'm psychotic. I'm losing track. I don't know what's going on. I'll wake up and not know where I was or what happened. Okay. And you become so wedded to this self-diagnosis that you then live this out and you begin to be the diagnosis and not be a person with the diagnosis. Okay. And spoiler. I was going to say twist and spoiler. The whole time you had traumatic induced dissociation, where you lose track of time when you're triggered by trauma memories. So you just convinced yourself you were crazy, and didn't seek someone outside your echo chamber. Okay. So that's the problem with self-diagnosis, is it can get you started down the road to help, but you can be constricted by it and you can start living it out and saying, oh no, that's just my blank. And a lot of people that you profile use their self-diagnoses as an excuse in your videos, which by the way is a sign of narcissism, to like say, oh, sorry, that was just my blank. Like a lack of empathy for what you've done and like writing it off to something. So that's a whole nother problem with self-diagnosis. But I think if you notice you're having symptoms, you should go seek someone who's a professional and allow them to offer a tentative diagnosis, and which gets refined as you go back multiple times, right? Again, it's a billing instrument, a diagnosis is. It's a cluster of symptoms. There are some diagnoses that are physiologically based. Obviously autism is one of those, but a lot of them, it's based on your number of symptoms. Like depression, why is it that depression, major depressive disorder, you're diagnosed with if 2 weeks you're depressed? Why not a week in 23 hours? No reason. A bunch of guys got together in a room and voted on it. That's when you get really deep into the lore of psychiatry, is like what separates it from on a metaphysical level from like 2 weeks versus right up leading up to it. It's like, so don't live constricted by your diagnoses, especially the ones you put on yourself. Go get help that's targeted to your symptoms. We're moving past that, moving into a trans diagnostic model that's based on brain activity, which I couldn't be more excited for, because I think it helps people to stop living by labels. But okay, back to the other one they asked, what do you do when you've exhausted everything? Look up, that gets into it. Look up what symptoms you're having. So if you're having flashbacks or nightmares, look up EMDR. Go to the International EMDR Association, which I'm affiliated with them. EMDR, Eye Movement Desensitization Reprocessing International Association, EMDRIA. Okay, EMDRIA.org. Go on there, look in your area. It's by the zip code, for God's sake. Find someone and go look for that. Look at what's based on your symptoms. If you feel you've exhausted resources, I guarantee you there will be somebody, unless you're in Alaska. I mean, I can't guarantee it, but unless you're in a severely rural area with no providers, there's probably someone who has a theoretical modality of treatment that will fit your symptoms and issues. That it's really just the fact that you're being told the same CBT type stuff of just think better.
Yeah, that's pretty much that's therapy I had for a really long time. Actually, I did CBT for like, I want to say 5 years.
I'm not shitting on it. I think it's a good place to start, but with trauma survivors, I far prefer to go into integrative stuff and hit the memories. I like to go deprogram the memories rather than go try to get it. It's like pulling the leaves off of a dandelion instead of uprooting it. CBT is, to me, in a way.
Yeah, that makes sense now that I think of it, actually. Yeah, that
Schema therapy is good.
Okay, so you said you'd rage against this one. So it says, what's your advice for people who don't want to get mental health help because they've had bad experiences with therapists / mental health professionals in the past?
Yeah, this bullshit, because, oh, fuck, it's awful. These people, I have this client who we are just deprogramming. Every session she tells me some fresh hell that her previous female narcissist therapist inflicted upon her. And I've just told her, look, because it's from another state and she moved here. I'm like, look, here's how you go to the Department of Regulatory Agencies, DORA website. Here's how you file a complaint. Because some of this shit was illegal that was done to you. I'm sorry. I hate it. Let's target it with EMDR, get the emotion out of it so that you stop reliving it, for God's sake. That's order one. But then you can do things that make you feel like no one hurt me. I have autonomy. I can get through this. So it's tough because you get people who are unlicensed life coaches who will have great reviews and they're really sunny and they seem great. And then it's like, well, that seems appealing, right? It's very shiny. But I recommend against that because you have no legal recourse if they fuck you over. They're not controlled by the state, which sounds really malevolent, but they have no accountability is a better way to say that. So always go to someone who has accountability. Don't be naive enough to think that just because they seem nice, they're going to be bound to something. Sorry, it doesn't always work that way. If you feel that a therapist isn't listening to you, it's probably it might be a good idea, or they keep asking you over and over again the same questions. Obviously not like if they forget your pet's name, for God's sake, and you have like 20 pets, like one of those people you had on there whose Pac-Man frog died. It's like, okay, we could go into that, but that's like animal hoarding for one thing. But if somebody, like if your therapist generally just seems dissociated from you or doesn't have anything to say, or it's probably a good idea to cut the cord there pretty quickly. Go to someone who has, I would say, a resume with some post-grad training. Okay, that's a good litmus test. Okay, so I graduated from grad school, and that arms you with knowing just how much you don't know. Anyone who's saying that it's like you get kind of a buffet, a smorgasbord of theoretical approaches that are all surface level. So like a surface level buffet of, oh, here's some cognitive behavior stuff. Oh, here's some reality therapy, which yes is a therapy type. It's kind of interesting. Sounds cooler than it is, in my opinion. But you get like narrative therapy, which is, rewriting your story, externalizing your problems so you don't identify with eating disorder. It's like, what does it look like when my eating disorder impulses come on? It's like, okay, I'm separate from. Look at someone who had the passion to continued learning. If your therapist is hungry to continue learning stuff and you get like a warm vibe from them, when you come in, you feel that you have their attention, you feel that they have stuff to say, but that they don't cut you off. I know I'm giving a lot of stuff and it's like, well, that sounds like a unicorn, for God's sake. Well, it's a job where you need some expertise. I mean, go to someone who has some passion and you want to show, you want somebody who's really eager to specialize in something. So if you have a lot of trauma, go to someone who specializes in EMDR or trauma-focused CBT, because trauma-focused CBT has an edge and is better than just run-of-the-mill CBT, right? So connecting with the therapist can be tough. I tell my clients, there's someone out there for everyone. It's like a non-romantic, it's like a friendship, except that metaphor obviously has limited utility, but it's the closest thing, because if it's not right for you and you're not connecting, don't be afraid to break up. Like we sometimes have to break up with friends who have gone to a place that we can't pull them out of, or they don't want to go out of, or it's not working. Or every time we talk to them, it's an argument on their end. And we can try as much as we want. But when your mental health's at stake, you got to go to someone you connect with. And you said this earlier, someone who maybe has a personality that helps. If your therapist, here's a big warning flag that I got the other day that my client inspired me for. Her past therapist would complain to her or tell her things she'd been through. Your therapist should never be eliciting empathy from you intentionally, because that's your hour to be the center of attention. And not in a narcissistic way, in a let's get in and rewrite your story kind of way. Your therapist should never be fishing for empathy. I'm sorry. If someone in their family died, if something just happened and they have to explain why they didn't see you for a few weeks or why they referred you and now you're coming back to them, fine. That's just pretext, and you can do that before you charge the client on the out. Like client should never have to pay money to hear someone else talk. If you ever notice that happening, get the fuck out. I mean, it'll never go uphill from there.
Wow, I didn't know that was like a thing that happened to people, that therapists would try and get a reaction or fishing for compliments or something. I didn't know.
It's okay. So I'll get more specific. It's like if they're complaining about something or they're telling their client something similar. I mean, sometimes, and I don't want to make this controversial, but sometimes the closer someone is in demographics to their client, the more transference there is. And you'll get like maybe a female therapist and a female client talking about previous bad relationships. This is what I was hearing about happening. And it's not your girlfriend. This is not your Sunday brunch, right? Somebody's paying you to listen to them. They're not paying you to do Sex in the City on the clock. So be aware when that happens. A therapist should have the ego strength, the autonomy, the self-awareness to allow that to happen. Now, if it serves the purpose, like for me, I've had issues with perfectionism where I want to do things right. And I've had clients who just are convinced they can't get through it. And I'll say, well, here's some stuff that I know is helpful. And if they really, really aren't able to connect with it, I'll say, no, it works. I've helped other people do it. It's worked for me. And that's it. Like, that's self-disclosure should never it should really never happen unless it's for your client's well-being, right? That's it, full stop. But then people have wiggle room there to interpret what they want. So I play it safe with that.
I actually had a question because you mentioned life coaches.
Okay.
So my mom has this life coach. I've from the get-go said that I think he's a fraud. I genuinely think
words.
I genuinely think he's a fraud. Not even because he's a life coach. Like, it wasn't based on that. It was just like his behavior to me screams, we need to call the police.
Wow. Okay.
And the thing is, I have found that I've tried to talk to her about it, and I think she kind of realizes what I'm saying as I say it, but then she'll just kind of like shrink away from it. And the next time I bring it up, it's like she'll forget everything I brought up, and she'll go back to like, no, he's just young. He's still figuring it out. And I'm like, well, he's charging you. So like, he shouldn't be figuring it out if he's charging
Bingo.
you.
Right on.
But I guess my question was, because like this reminds me kind of what we were talking about just now, that he like, in a way, guilt trips her or tells her things that make her feel bad to get a reaction out of her. But then she'll like focus on the things that he said that make her feel bad, which then make her come back to him because she's like, I feel so bad about this thing. Help me figure it out, as if he wasn't the one inflicting it. And it's kind of crazy because I never really experienced life coaches until this happened. And then now I'm kind of seeing why it is that people get life coaches and how they get sucked into it, because I've seen her and she's not a stupid person. So the fact that someone sucked her in like that, and he sucked in a bunch of other people that I know of. And I think I've realized the thing is that, okay, example, my mom loves Steve Jobs. Don't get me started, but she loves Steve Jobs.
How about Elizabeth
Holmes?
First they started to stop you, and then they try to change the world.
Okay.
So that with no blinking. So
psychopathy.
So it's funny because he reminds me of Elizabeth Holmes. I actually brought up Elizabeth Holmes when I was talking because I was like, she sells you a bunch of shit that is crap, like it's not real. And then people find out it's not real and everyone acts surprised when nobody cared to look into it, right?
Except the female who knew that it wouldn't work at her college at Stanford.
And nobody listened.
Right, because they thought she was jealous because she was older, right? God, did I at that moment think, yeah, this is the woman who's right. I loved watching that documentary. That was fun as hell.
Well, the funny thing is this. So, like, he does these, like, retreats.
Uh-huh. Ooh.
I had to go on one of them with my mom because she wanted emotional support. Are
you the emotional support animal? I'm kidding.
Essentially, yes, because she told me don't start raging at him in the middle of a session. I was like, okay, I'll just be mute, raging in silence. But like, there were a bunch of people in this retreat that were like her, like in her same position. Like, everyone who this life coach has gathered are all people who are broken in some way, like a very obvious way. Someone just found out they had cancer. Someone was going through a divorce. Someone lost a parent. And everyone he was coaching was in this kind of position where they were obviously going through something, and his promise was kind of to fix them, but without doing anything. So like, he'll take them on these retreats, make them think that they're going to have this big life change, but then they go home and nothing's changed. But in the moment, he makes you feel like you're discovering all this stuff that's just not accurate.
Okay, so a lot to unpack there. First of all, I would say that if you don't know what someone's doing, or you're not aware of what modality it is, then it's something to be taken very seriously, because you'll hear about these things where if someone can't explain to you what they're going to do. I mean, would you go to a doctor here's where it gets into religious and kind of superstitious territory. No one would go to a doctor who didn't explain to them what they were going to do with open heart surgery, right? Or if they weren't, they're going to say, I'm going to do surgery on you for your heart. It's like, okay, what kind of surgery? Well, we'll see when we get there, and it'll just be the process, and we'll just kind of feel our way into. No one would do that. So not most people wouldn't. So with these retreats, there are some that really help, like with vinyasa yoga. Trauma-informed yoga is amazing. And the way we know that works is people can breathe through motions and do things that help them to feel that they have autonomy of their body. So just even that short of a description is like, this is what happens. Here's some literature on how we know it works. So I'll just go back to this point that without transparency and authenticity, there is no real therapy. If you don't know what it is that someone's going to do to you, beware. Let the buyer beware, because you're buying hype. You're buying the product rather than the process. And that's very dicey. You may have some good memories. So what happens is they sell these memories, these experiences where you go and you have like a peak moment and you feel extremely powerful, and you go walk on coals or something that's very different and feels, right? Very powerful. But then you have to ask, what changed? What actually changed in my life? And if the answer is nothing, then beware, right? If it's not that you learned that those memories can't affect you anymore, or that you're beyond that, then you haven't learned much. You haven't done anything. So peak experiences can teach you, hey, wait a minute, my dad, I'm bigger than my dad now. I'm tall. He can never treat me like this again. If you have one of those experiences at a life coach retreat, great. That'll affect the rest of your life. But that's not usually what's happening. It's usually this thing of, I have potential. Great. What are you going to do about it? That's where therapy comes in. So you're right to bring that up. I mean, the less you know exactly what someone plans to do, the more suspicious you should view it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you deal with this like in the mental health sector. I know that this person in particular, the life coach, likes using buzzwords that sound
right,
like they would be oriented around mental health, but
right,
it just falls kind of flat. So he goes a lot with like mindfulness and purpose. Yeah, I think mindfulness is the one he repeats like 100 times to kind of try to drive home a point, but he's never defined mindfulness, but he'll just use it as his kind of explanation. So I definitely think that that's what he's doing. He's selling an experience. And by using terms like mindfulness, I think he tricks people into thinking, oh, this guy must know what he's talking about. He's using this like particular terminology.
So that's a good thing to keep in mind, this whole idea of, is someone adopting terminology tactically that they don't really, that is either hollow or they're not using it right. So just so everyone out there can be clear once and for all, mindfulness, because I teach a weekly class on this, is simply non-judgmental focus on the present. Anything can be done mindfully. Mindfulness is a practice. It's an orientation to the moment. It's not a one-time thing. So if you mindfully live your day, what that looks like is avoiding perseverating, fancy therapist word for obsessing, over your ex. You went through the day, you said, I'm going to focus on now. I'm going to focus on what it feels like to go breathe outside on a nice sunny day. That's mindfulness. You don't have to buy that. Now you can buy aids, different kind of therapeutic aids for that. You can use apps, you can use all sort of things to feel better about that. But you can't, if someone's selling you thousands of dollars worth of stuff for that, you don't really, you're kind of going above and beyond what you need to do.
I completely agree. I just needed to hear it from someone else. So the next time I tell my mom, I have backing.
Well, I mean, of course, I don't know anything that's going on in here in particular, but I do know that anyone can use the term mindful. I mean, it's not something that's trademarked. Picking up on the life coaching thing, God, I think there's also an erosion of professionalism in the field because you've got people who think that you don't have to be professional and like you're entitled to be yourself and all this. And you are. One of these people who was talking, like you called it like a hip mom. We're in such a very fascinating space where we entertain, like there's this duality of like the professional and the personal, and it's so thin, that little veneer now. But if we have any other questions, I'm really enjoying that too.
Okay, let me just look through them to see if there's one that's particularly...
I like the fleur-de-lis finger tattoo.
Thank you. People always think it's for... I don't follow football teams, but there's apparently a football team that has it as like
Notre Dame. They think it's a Notre Dame tattoo.
I had someone in my dorm ask me that, and I was like, we're not going to be friends.
Well, I don't want to be rude, but that's the French national, like that's a French thing. But way before, and Notre Dame is French because it's like the cathedral, obviously, but it's a football team from Louisiana. So, Louisiana is related to France because of, Cajun culture. But it's first and foremost a beautiful French symbol. It's a fleur. That means flower in France.
Yeah, that took me aback, that comment in my dorm. I was like, wow, okay, I did not think I had to explain.
Football's okay. I don't really follow it that much.
No.
Just kidding, guys. I love it. Go Broncos.
Okay, so let me see if there's another question that's... I think this one could be interesting because I know a lot of people who do this. It says, how to maintain relationships when you're stuck isolating yourself. And the reason I mention this one is because I know a lot of my friends, when they're depressed, they just kind of like go MIA.
Okay. Yeah. Wow, what a great question. There's something called behavioral activation therapy, BAT, which is a really good one. And it involves doing things even when you don't feel like it. So I'll hit this on two different ends, from a friend end and as the individual. So as a friend, if someone you know is isolating, try to do like the least intrusive thing possible to get along with them, to do something, to introduce some kind of socialization into their lives, okay? To come over and ask what they need, not to get them to maybe go with you clubbing or something, even though that may seem like a really good idea for the extroverts who are trying to help someone who's introverted and depressed. If they're willing to go with you to do something, great. If they want, you get to, if it's a friend, you're going to know their interests. So I'm not even going to belabor that point. I'm not even going to give a lot of examples for that. Do something that aligns with their interests. Watch a horror movie if it's somebody who has that sensibility, and just, or like a funny one, points for that. Like you can just laugh at something extremely obscenely gory and funny, whatever it is, to kind of meet that person with that, what they enjoy, but not in a way where they're feeling forced to do it. So it's a real balance. That's a good question because it's kind of tough because it's so contextual. So the context would be like somebody who, loves music. Maybe you guys go over and listen to some bands that are nostalgic for them, but not like reminding them of an ex or something. Good nostalgia. So as a friend, I introduce this phrase a lot to people because it's interesting. Like, be a used car salesperson when it comes to the goals you want to fulfill or with others. Let me explain that more because that deserves explaining. So people will often talk about not wanting to exercise because they get overwhelmed with the idea of being there and all that they need to do, right? Like hit the treadmill, do weights, whatever. So tell yourself, I'm going to go to 24-hour fitness, whatever, and I'm going to stay for 10 minutes. And I'm going to give myself permission to stay for 10 minutes. I mean it. You have to believe it, because if you're trying to manipulate yourself, you're going to fight back. If that's too much, 5 minutes of doing the bicep machine, whatever. So that's an example, that's a tactile example of doing the least restrictive thing for a goal. So if you are the person who is struggling with depression and isolating, ask yourself, could I have my best friend over for an hour and let him or her or they know, hey, I'm not feeling really great right now. I love that you're reaching out to me. Or please come over and can we hang for a little bit for this amount of time? Maybe do this. Time limited activity. Something that you can tell yourself, I don't have to get over my depression right now. I don't have to totally put on a show, put on this mask of extroversion, of friendliness. And you'll be much more likely what you're doing is you're kind of bypassing your mental defenses, right? Because right now is not the time to make huge changes when you're in the throes of it. When you're in the throes of depression, it's kind of more of a palliative sort of doing the least intrusive thing. Now, then as you start to socialize more and you feel better, you do a little more, a little more, a little more. Now, obviously, this is totally not taking into account if someone's suicidal. That's a whole other thing, but we didn't mention that. So I'm assuming it's like just a funk or a malaise, kind of existential, like quarantining of oneself, maybe seasonal affective disorder, where you just don't feel like doing something. For one thing, there's $30 lights on Amazon you can get for that, which little lamps, which are amazing. But really get into how little you could do comfortably, but still push outside that comfort zone a little bit.
I'm actually going to make a note of that because I know a friend who could use it.
Well, please. I'm basically going to turn my office into like this really chic mental spa at this point. We'll see. We'll see.
Are you going to have like incense and candles and everything?
Candles would be more my style. Incense is a little much. Plus, I don't want to destroy someone's allergies. I mean,
true. Didn't think of that. So
no, it's fine. Candles, yo. That's a good one.
Did you want to do more questions or did you want to move on? Or
why don't we move on? Your interview with someone who has minor attraction was very disturbing, but needed.
Oh yeah, that was
attracted person. Yeah,
that was terrible, especially because for me it was like 6 a.m. when I did that interview because we have a time difference, so I had to like wake up super early to be able to do that.
We already had inspiration from fictional characters. What do you think about that?
I'm not sure I entirely relate. I don't think I relate to a profound level. That being said, I think for me, fictional characters have always been more of a surface kind of goal in the sense of like, let's say, Interview with the Vampire. I absolutely love Lestat as a character from Interview with the Vampire.
Right.
Because I think he's flamboyant and fun, and in some ways, I would like to have some of his personality traits where he seems so carefree.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll try to like embody Lestat if I'm too much in my head, but it's not like a deep kind of connection that I think that maybe this person's referring to. So I don't really think I have much of a say on it because my connection with fictional characters has always been pretty surface.
Right. So one of the big things to think about is, well, for one thing, that's pretty healthy. I mean, there's nothing wrong with fictional characters and using them in an inspirational way to an extent. If you start to really, and especially if it's a fictional character who is like a positive example, right? I'm going to assume that's what people mean. I mean, don't use a negative one. But there's actually some EMDR exercises, some visualizations that involve imagining an inner advisor coming to you. And people often use fictional characters, but that's just it. It's like that's someone who is coming to you and offering you wisdom and offering you, well, here's something you can do that's clever or fun or self-esteem. And preferably if it's someone who's like a positive archetype, like a character who represents all good, like something from Lord of the Rings or some shit like that. But if you start to identify with that and kind of and be any one-dimensional thing is not that advisable to become. So let's move on to one that you got, a question that you got. What are your thoughts on personality disorders like borderline personality disorder, especially from Ready to Glare, as you probably hear more negative viewpoint from bad cases and reports?
I remember reading that, and when I try to think about it, I don't think with any kind of disorder or mental illness, I have an opinion. Like, I don't have an umbrella opinion about any of them. Like, I'll have an opinion specific to the case, but if someone asked me, what do you think about BPD? I don't think anything.
Okay, fine. No, that's great. Let's move on. So let's kind of go backwards here from some recent cases. The hypnosis gone wrong. I have some thoughts on that.
Okay, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's bull crap. It's the hypnosis. It's not. That person most likely has paranoid schizophrenia. And here's the reason I think it's not malingering or acting, in other words. She decapitated her son's father's mother, so would-be mother-in-law, whatever. And then when the police got there, she was very calm about it and seemed convinced that she was commanded to do it. So from how disjointed she appeared in those letters that she subsequently sent, combined with the calmness, I would rule out psychopathy almost. Of course, I can't diagnose her, disclaimer, I don't know her, but I do know that the disjointed letters didn't do her any favors to the judges. It made her look terrible. And because you said they were very garbled and incomprehensible, well, that's a real sign of psychosis and delusional thinking, in other words, like what we call word salad, someone just regurgitating a bunch of stuff and not making sense. So that, and the quotes, each has a lens or glasses behind. Well, behind what? That's very, very schizophrenic writing style. You know, God sees everything. Mirrors are God's windows. Very common themes in psychotic delusions. It usually is stuff like that that's very religious. In her drawings were very religious. So I would say there's a great likelihood that it's a case of unmedicated mental illness really gone wrong. So it's really sad. We need better care for those severe disorders. And her son, the 11-year-old now, was 9 then, he could really use some EMDR to desensitize like the pain and the imagery from that. That's who I think about, as you said. And the jury who had to hear it could use some of that too.
Well, do you think then, because like she said that she had a quote unquote exorcism, do you think that's just like did she have a hallucination or visions, or I don't know, was it something in her mind, or do you think that actually happened?
She could be warping something. Did you ever see that movie where the women are in the psych ward? Sucker Punch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, Sucker Punch has gotten a lot of hate, which I think is pretty accurate because it's kind of the whole male gaze thing. It's very objectifying of these women in a mental ward. Very problematic to use. I know that's your favorite word that you got hammered in at grad school. But it's problematic in the sense that that's that portrayal. But the sort of way that the kernel, the very small piece of truth behind these immaculate visions of fighting giant robots, that theme, you can apply that very loosely, not religiously, to psychotic thinking, where she may have had an intervention and she's calling it a sort of covert hypnotic thing. That doesn't really mean anything. Lots of people with psychosis believe that they're being activated or controlled by an invisible, weightless, senseless implant in their mind. And so they've got this sort of hang up on control. So she could have had a medical kind of intervention with that. She could have gone to the church and tried to get an exorcism. I doubt any of that. So the worst that could have done is exacerbated her visions already. You can't make someone schizophrenic. You can't make them have visions, at least not that way. So I think there may have been some truth to it as a kind of intervention there. Maybe someone did something or prayed for her, and now she's thinking that's what caused it. Did you ever hear about that guy who painted on his car over and over and over again, God entered my body like a body same size? The Bob Hickman. Okay. So when I read her statement of each has a lens or glasses behind, the cadence and then the like no continuing of the sentence, just complete vagary of it. It's very difficult to fake that, especially for someone who is disjointed as that. I mean, you can kind of say the hypnosis is probably not what did it. It would have to be very severe, like consistent hypnotic. That's MK Ultra stuff. So that's beyond what I really have a ton of knowledge about. But I think it's really that she went into a severe psychotic state. Her mood got dysregulated and she acted on stuff that she normally may have been able to repress. Who caused that? We don't know. If she really had some folk exorcism at a church that was well-intentioned but sent her into that sucks. But the problem there is that she was unmedicated and untreated. Not that someone, because if you're fragile, if their mental health is that fragile at that point, it's tough because something was going to break.
Right. So if it wasn't this, there would have been something else, right? So if it wasn't the exorcism or whatever happened that she thought was an exorcism, it would have been something else because she was bound to like break.
Because nobody told her, saw off the woman's head because you got to free your soul. I mean, that is nothing someone's going to say in exorcism. So somehow she got that thought in her mind and perseverated on it of, I've got to free this soul. I've got to free this. Like, it's okay. That delusion was kicked off into high gear is what it was. That particular one.
Yeah, that makes more sense, because I was wondering like where the exorcism thing came from, but it makes sense that it would be, you know, maybe something else, and then she saw it as an exorcism, whether it was like an intervention or something else even. It might have been an intervention. That would have made sense.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not saying, obviously that's not the gospel truth. I don't know. She could have gone to a church and tried like a last-ditch effort to get, here's what could have happened. She went as a last-ditch effort, and this would be tragic, by the way, to get rid of these thoughts, and she was being untreated, and she thought, well, I'm going to go get this done, and then it didn't work, and the fact that it didn't work made her more upset, and the thoughts kept coming on stronger, and she finally acted on them.
Right.
Kind of stuff happens. So another case of somebody falling through the cracks with mental health stuff, where, listen, I come from a Christian background. I get it. I understand it, and I respect faith a lot. I'm Christian. I definitely am not of the same denominations that you would think of who deny mental illness, because it really is a big deal. And so when we have people meddling in that stuff who don't understand that sometimes you need medication, or that's a chemical issue or even a structural issue we know with schizophrenia, then that can harm more than it helps.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm also Christian, so there's nothing, it's nothing particular against any religion.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not practicing, but I was raised as Christian, so.
Yeah. Mental illness is trendy. Ooh woo. Yeah, that was a good video of yours. Ooh woo.
Oh God, I hate that saying.
Do you ever watch ooh woo? Do you ever watch TikTok cringes? That's good for me. I enjoy watching the cringe comps.
Yeah, I do enjoy watching those. I feel like I watch those especially if I'm in a bad mood, because somehow I take pride in not being the person in the compilation.
I look at it to know what new sort of mental health problems I'll be dealing with in a month from now when people come in and they're doing that shit.
Well, yeah, that's actually a good way to kind of plan ahead. Just put it in your agenda. This is what's happening in a month. You've been told via TikTok.
Oh my God. No, it's very fascinating because you get like these 60-year-old people who have no teeth and have lived hard lives, who are doing like these 2000s rock things where they've got like fire coming out of their mouth. It's like, wow, you're really LARPing at something here. There's some sort of a fantastical, just wait till the technology from that movie Ready Player One comes out. You've got like these people who like in their real life or in a trailer, not there's anything wrong with that. I'm from the South. I can say that. And then, well, it's the stacks, right? The stacks from the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So you get that, and you've got like this person who looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's really somebody LARPing from a trailer with some Mountain Dew. Oh my God. God help us.
Yeah, that's really scary. I was about to say that's really scary.
But you know that's coming. Like we're there almost. We're at augmented reality versus full virtual. TikTok is augmented reality.
Yeah, but who's to say that I won't be on a secluded island and won't have to deal with any of it?
Nobody's to say that. Nobody's to say that.
There we go. So I'll just be away and watching your augmented reality from far away.
No. If I want to look like that kind of character, I'll just work out more. I don't need to do the fake thing. Like you just be putting on this imagery. Anyway, enough about that. The mental illness is trendy thing. You brought up the point, or somebody brought up the point that you referenced, that anxiety and depression are cute to kind of talk about, but when it comes to severe illnesses, then it's not as cute, which I think is pretty accurate. I think relatability is not a bad thing. I think when we draw attention to it, that's great. But here's the problem. When it becomes like the hottest people talking about mental disorders and wearing them as a badge, I mean, it doesn't do a lot for people that are suffering, who don't have access to that sort of influence, who don't have ways to get help. So if you're using it to draw attention and tell people where to look for help, great. But if you're using it as a marketing scheme for only yourself and your brand, that's somewhat disquieting.
Well, and in that particular video, I think what I was talking about was when it becomes your entire brand. So you're not.
Bingo. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah. So it's not like you're Anna and you happen to have depression. It's like you have depression and also you're Anna. So it's like the person you are is like the secondary thing, which to me is alarming and sad because it's so one-dimensional. Like, who would want to be like, oh yeah, she's the depressed girl? Like, wouldn't it be better to be like, that's Anna, she's into this, this, and that, she also has depression? But in a lot of those, it's like the depression is primary. And even if it's a big part of your life, I would never want to be seen as, this is who she is, and then also she has a personality, but we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah. No, I think you've nailed something there. It really comes down to identity. So person first language is a really big thing now in the mental health world, meaning a person with schizophrenia, a person with depression. So that's one thing we're trying to do as practitioners, is go toward a way of conceptualizing people as more than the sum of their problems, right? Imagine that. That gets into a strengths-based approach to therapy, which is very popular, and I think it's a good way to go. So as long as you can look at your problem as a problem and not your identity, then you're pretty golden. I mean, so that gets into this idea. We can segue from that into, that's also self-diagnosis, by the way, right? If I am depression or I'm just depressed, that's very different than I'm struggling with depression. Let's get rid of it. So there's this concept in psychoanalytic thought of an egosyntonic versus dystonic conceptualization. And so an egosyntonic problem, it's sort of synonymous with your personality, right? So it's something like a personality disorder where you don't view it as a problem. So it's like an autoimmune disorder where your personality, like as a narcissist, you really believe you're better than everyone else, right? That's not a problem. What's wrong with that? You identify with it. It's egosyntonic. So egodystonic, something like a mood disorder, comes on and you notice, I don't like this. What is this? This is a problem, right? So when you start to tip into identifying with depression and having it be a syntonic problem, it's kind of, it's like assimilating you, right? Like the Borg almost. It's becoming this thing where you are becoming this cluster of symptoms, this syndrome, versus fighting back and treating it as just a part of you.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was kind of trying to get to in a more conversational tone.
Of course. No, of course.
But yeah, I think that's kind of what bothered me as well, because it then goes back to, it can be quirky. It can be really quirky to say, oh, I have so much anxiety. Haha, I'm so relatable.
I'm not like other girls.
I'm not like the other girls. That's a very I'm not like the other girls thing to say.
I know you hate that. Oh my God, do you hate
I despise that. I really, truly do. But the other thing that bothers me about that is, if I said that about an eating disorder, like I was bulimic years ago, that wouldn't sound quirky to anyone, being like, oh, I'm so bulimic, haha. Like, that's not quirky, because it's not, because there aren't many people who go around making bulimia their identity in like a fun way. Whereas I feel like with anxiety and depression, I see people a lot trying to make it fun because it's their entire identity. So I think that's also what bothers me, is that you're picking specific ones to make cute, but then you're also forgetting that there are all these other ones and that none of them are cute. Like, none of them are fun or quirky or
it's not Pokemon, you don't have to catch them all.
Well, exactly. And I think that's what frustrated me too, because they're talking about wanting to spread awareness, but they're not doing anything like that.
Well, let's just be totally blunt. When someone says they want to spread awareness, that's about as useful as fucking nothing. Because if you're not spreading the awareness and saying, here's what works for this thing, and I'm going to cite something, like I'm going to send you or say, contact your local suicide hotline, that doesn't help. It's just your brand. I mean, whatever. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So I think what we can conclude pretty safely is, it's not quirky if someone feels a secondhand awkwardness or pity. Right? It's like, someone will probably feel like, wow, bulimia, that's a serious disorder. Anorexia, it's not cute. It's not something you can say is, and not that there's, it's very widespread. That's the thing though. Food restriction. Oh my God. I can't imagine how common that would be in California too, with people who aspire to look just right as actresses and everything like that. But, and then bulimia, we know is different. That's the binging and purging. But, if someone, and that's where it's kind of like this folk approach to mental health. a therapist or someone who's a real advocate should never feel awkward or embarrassed to talk to someone about this stuff. So that quirkiness has this limit where it's like nice at parties and shit, with people who have a threshold where they feel awkward talking about anything beneath a surface level mental illness, right? It's like, okay, we get it.
Well, and I think it also, for me anyway, it also has to do with imagery, because when someone says to someone at one of those surface, like, quirky parties, whatever, if you tell someone I have anxiety, if we go with the quirky popular imagery of anxiety, they'll probably imagine a girl who's like really pretty and she's just so anxious to talk to the boy she likes. That's probably the imagery we're going to get if we go
Thanks,
with
I hate it.
Yeah, me too. But if you say bulimia, sure, there's the romanticized version of bulimia of like the ballerina who wants to be perfect and she has to throw up to maintain her body. There's the romanticized version, but realistically, the real version of bulimia is like someone who's going to fuck up their teeth and probably fuck up their internal organs, and someone who's throwing up. So like the imagery is not pretty in any way. And even if you try to romanticize it, it's very hard to. The same thing with anorexia. It's hard. Like, I know some people can do it, but in the end, someone being so thin that they could die, or that you see their bones, like, you can't make that pretty, which is why I think it's harder for people to use in terms of their quirky, oh, I'm so anxious, haha. You can't really say that about.
I agree. Oh God, do I agree. And it gets into the point that you made so adequately, so amazingly, on female offenders.
Oh God. Yeah.
Where you I know, right? It was like, I don't care that your hair is going over your shoulder and you are like the light from the cell glistens against the orange jumpsuit that's form-fitting her butt. Okay, this is not a Harlequin romance novel. Let's cut the shit.
Yeah. I think that's one of my primary problems with female offenders, is that they're immediately thrown into this box of like, I almost want to say like a hot villain or something like that, like a hot villain from a comic book. That's how they're seen immediately, compared to male, like male counterparts that have done the same crimes. They're immediately monsters, but because they're women, for some reason, they're immediately turned into Catwoman or some shit, like something that's convenient and pretty to look at and also somehow innocent when they're not.
It's kind of an evolutionary psychology thing of, you see the pretty eyes, and if someone's conventionally attractive, and you're thinking with your hind brain and your midbrain and not your frontal cortex, right? It's like, oh, this reaches my eyes as sad and attractive. And so like, if you unquestioningly follow that, then you're going to make some mistakes. And it's like the sexy felon. So, but the guy who, you know what I'm talking about? The guy with like the blue eyes who...
Yeah, he's on Fashion Nova now. He's a Fashion Nova model.
Well, I don't think you have to pass a background check to do that.
No, but I remember it. Didn't he go to jail for like battery or something? Like,
probably. Well, I mean, genetically, like, you pass on strong genes. It's like your brain tells you what it tells you as a kind of a pre-installed survival program to pass on good genes. It's our job to counter that with some new updates to the software, right? So that would be the way I would phrase it, is you gotta go beyond your first visceral impulse on a lot of things.
Yeah, and I just think the thing that frustrates me is that, I'm going to say quote unquote journalists, because very loose definitions of journalism we're using.
Especially now, everybody's got a blog.
Well, yeah, and even the people on, even people who write articles now that are for reputable online sources, the grammar mistakes, the spelling, I could go off, but...
Oh, are you a full-on grammar fascist, we'll say?
Oh, actually not even, but it's like, if you have consistent, like, issues where you're missing a letter or something like that, just...
No,
really,
I feel the same way, believe me.
It's like, get Grammarly. It's free. Anyway, so the thing is, like, certain journalists write about how they write about the women. That's what frustrates me, because they write it. They send it to an editor, and everyone somehow collectively thinks it's a genius idea to publish how the girl's hair was falling over her shoulder, never mind that she's a pedophile. That's a detail, I suppose.
Well, I mean, yeah, when you put it that way.
Well, that's what pisses me off, because
you mean the truth? Yeah, how about that?
it just keeps pushing forward the same narrative, though, because I'm like, if even the writers are now on board with, yeah, she's pretty, so forget the fact that she's done all these atrocities.
Well, it appeals. Go ahead. Yeah.
I have no words. I was just going to stop at I have no words.
So it appeals. I'll tag in it. It appeals to this whole thing of like, so it gets on two fronts, right? And this happens with several things. It can get into the kind of go girl mentality, female solidarity. It can get into men thinking it's hot. I mean, there's a lot of overlap there, and there's a lot of overlap in ways that are pathological, where like guys need to learn that everything that they find attractive isn't that great. So, I mean, please, for God's sake. And also, accountability is not a bad word. So what do you think, because I've got some real thoughts on this, what do you think is like a key foundational reason that some of these conventionally attractive women who seem to have no prior issues continually offend against late teen, okay, still wrong, boys at school? Because there's a lot of reasons for that potentially. I'm just curious your opinion.
I have some conspiracies.
Okay.
Some of the conspiracies are salty, like it's me being kind of bitchy, but some of them I think actually make sense. So my bitchy conspiracies are that in high school, they weren't popular and the guys weren't looking at them, but now suddenly we're talking about older teen boys are looking at them and they want to fulfill something that they weren't able to fulfill prior because they weren't in the position. So that's the bitchy one. The other one is more like there's something that they're missing, like whether they're in a relationship that's not working out or if they maybe just had a breakup, or even single women, like there's something that makes them feel like they're inferior. And so if someone is almost like, just like, I guess in lust with them, they feel some kind of rush that comes from that, so they just run with it no matter how depraved it may be. But it's always, I find it to be always like something's missing or something happened to make you think this is a good viable option for me.
Right. So I would add on to that. That's beautiful, by the way, very in line with what I would think. So, and we can go, so both of those are pretty viable, and both of those are reasons that men and women cheat, in ways that aren't illegal and disturbing. They're still disturbing, but not illegal. So we'll get into that too. But the cheating, which God, I am so tired of. I am so tired of hearing the articles that justify it because, you're exploring yourself. This is not this is not Eat, Pray, Love. Okay. But anyway, well, it kind of is. It's like Eat, Pray, Love 2020 2.0 Hell Edition. Just like the natural evolution of that sort of I am the world and the world exists to appease my Western palate. But anyway, so the school teacher thing, if the women, some of the women are conventionally attractive, to me would lead me to believe that potentially, especially when they start hitting their mid-30s, which by no means means you're old. Okay, I want to get that out there. Okay. I also want to add that for women in our culture, they're taught that when they start hitting that, I mean, for God's sake, there's a term called the wall. Like, you've hit the wall, it all goes downhill. It's like, okay, that's harsh. So if someone is feeling insecure about that, about getting older, right, then there may be more of a predilection and a weakening factor to accepting the attention of a male who represents male youthfulness, vitality, and virility, right? Especially if it's a woman who dreads losing her attractiveness. So it's like symbolically restoring that youth in a way where it's like, oh, I'm still attractive. I'm still attractive to guys that are young. I'm still young. So someone who's very insecure to that probably reaches a breaking point with it. It's how I would think about it potentially.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense, especially because even women towards women will keep that kind of narrative going of like, you're 35 and you're not married, you don't have children, like, my God.
Absolutely.
So I think it's also a question of that, of maybe feeling judged by their peers, especially because I feel like almost every group of friends is like they're all married and there's one who's not, or it's like they're all single and there's just one who's married. So there's always like this majority and minority. And I think that if you're in the minority who's single and everyone else is married or whatever, automatically they would feel some type of way, I'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh God. Okay. the cheating thing, that seems to really piss you off in a way that near, like, a lot of stuff upsets you on a level where you're disappointed, right? Where your disappointment is disappointed. But then
Yes.
for anger, the cheating stokes your flames in an ungodly way. So let's get into that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a very big bias in that perspective because I'm from my parents are divorced because my
Okay.
dad cheated.
Right. Okay. I think
So
yeah.
automatically I'm a little bit less forgiving. I don't think I'd be far less forgiving, honestly, even if I came from a happy family or whatever.
Sure.
But
It's just not in your nature to do. You don't agree with that.
no, and it's funny because I have arguments with people in my family on almost a weekly basis about this because apparently I'm the only one who's black and white about cheating. Everyone else is gray, strangely enough. But there's no way I can justify it. I mean, I think the only time actually I think it's gray is if there's abuse involved.
I
Then
agree with that.
it's a different story. And
I agree.
I'm not counting that in what I'm talking about. That's separate, not what I'm referring to.
Good.
Aside from that, stay in an open relationship, don't commit, stay single. There are like millions of different options. So for someone to decide to be monogamous and then be like, you know what, fuck that. And it's not like it has to be single or monogamous. That's why I'm bothered, because it's like you had all these other options and yet you're a dumbass. I don't.
No, but let's be honest. People would rather choose the cheating option rather than the open relationship option for the simple reason that they want to have another partner, but they don't want their actual partner to have that and get that attention and have to be insecure about that, right? So
I mean, that's what I've always thought. Yeah,
that's probably right. So there's a specific tone difference in men's and women's cheating accounts. It's very fascinating in a way of, wow, this is horrible. So it's like the story you read about the proud cheating wife. Like, I have no time for, that's your quote. You don't have any time for anything that puts cheating in a positive light. It's like, a small part of me knew that we would cheat. So I wrote that down from the account there because that stood out to me from the story. When you excuse something like that by projecting it out and saying it was like a part of you, or you just knew it would happen and you completely abdicate and abandon responsibility, you've set yourself up to do it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's the same kind of person who says something like, I wish we could choose our children's daddies. That tweet, if you've read that, that tweet bothered me horribly for about, 30 minutes or whatever. And then it just comes back as an intrusive image. But it's one of those things where, did you really think, like, that betrays a level of ignorance where you actually think other people really think that way? And some do. But the fact that you would think it's that widespread of, well, I listen to my sort of hindbrain base attractiveness on everything, and I don't look like my attraction to someone, and I don't look past anything else. It's like mate and reproduce, and oh God, I can't believe it. Well, I blame my libido for that. Like, I had no way to stop my urges, because you had to be careful with that, because there, as we know, and as you do a lot of videos on, like with the minor stuff, it's like listening to your attraction is not always the way to go. Yeah. So it's like, but people make light of that, and it's like, it just kind of, and when people say it just happened, or I didn't mean to hurt you, that lets you know you're dealing with someone who hasn't done a lot of self-exploration yet. Because for one thing, who sets out to cheat and hurt their partner? That's psychopathic. You usually set out to cheat, or you don't set out. You allow progressive levels of temptation to be desensitized, and you take down the barrier slowly. Before you know it, oh no, I cheated. Well, but you decided to stay after work late, like they did in that story. You decided to be alone with this person. You decided to continue drinking. You decided to, any number of factors that you unconsciously let build up until the point where you cheat. You can say, oh, he just grabbed me and kissed me. Oh my gosh. No, you've set it up, both of you, in a way that takes every single obstacle out.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's also why I'm black and white about it, because it's not just you show up to the office and boom, you just fall over and happen to cheat.
Right.
It's those consistent choices of I'm staying late, I'll be alone with them, XYZ, right?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where, just like with self-esteem, like that's like working out. It's like the opposite of exercise and setting up good habits, where we often will think, oh, I can't go do this because I have to do it all at once. No, for positive stuff, you want to set it up that way where you remove obstacles. You say, well, I'm going to leave my gym clothes in my car so that I can go after work. And I use that example a lot because a lot of people hate working out, hate stuff, which I totally understand that. But a lot of people hate that. And so they want to remove obstacles from it. So it's like a long day at work. Okay, leave the gym clothes in the bag. Well, I hate doing this kind of exercise. Fine, then don't do that. Do this kind. See if you're feeling like doing the other afterwards. Like, we don't think to do that for those things often, but we think to kind of set things up easily to enable our unconscious worst impulses. And so, but when you flip that, that's where some real self-development happens. When you start doing the things you don't want to do slowly and removing obstacles to those things and putting up obstacles to stuff that you know you're tempted toward.
Yeah, and I think that's also why in like the majority of those articles, you don't see them, like at least they don't portray themselves ever trying to halt these kinds of desires,
Right.
whatever it is. Like they just seem to go with it and just find a reason why they should go with it.
Well, and so then you get it. So the manosphere, like the whole men's self-help sphere, can be very anti-female. You get these this is kind of like fodder for them where they can say, told you so, told you so. And it's not that way. It's not hashtag all women. And just like it's not hashtag all men. So you get this sort of thing of, well, she says that her husband's a nice. See, what really fuels this is she's calling her husband a nice guy and saying he has boring sex. And your response to that was, well, don't marry him, you dumbass, which is a great perspective. But the negative to that is like him being a good provider, right? Makes him kind of a good mark. He's somebody stable, but like you want good genes from an attractive guy and you want provisioning from a guy who's reliable. It's like, it's your responsibility as a decent human being to find that in one person or to let the one other person know that it's not doing it. And you've got to either ask for an open relationship, which of course we know the author would probably think, no, I don't want to lose either one of these guys. And I'm going to lose it if I ask if I ask both of them or either of them to be okay with opening it up. So it's like, you should really be aware of what you're going to need or what you think you need in life. But people's lack of insight can really cause a huge problem down the road.
Well, and I think the final reason why it pisses me off is that most of the time it would just require a conversation. Like it would just require a conversation. Like you don't have to do anything crazy. Like if their intimate relations were not great, have a conversation, like change things. It just wouldn't require that much to at least try to fix whatever's awry.
100% agreed. And it's kind of an avoidant attachment thing. So I go into this a lot. If you have to go into, so I'm going to do like a big tweet storm on like the biggest things people can use to understand things the way a therapist does. One of them is attachment styles. So you've got anxious attachment, avoidant, and secure. Okay. So secure is ultimately, as it would sound, the kind of holy grail, best attachment style that takes a lot of work to get to. So, well, not necessarily, but it does depending on your background. And anyone with history or like whatever is going to have a hard time with that because you might be either avoidant or anxious. So it's like, well, what are those two? Well, the easiest way to keep it in mind is, what do you do during conflict? Somebody with avoidant attachment obviously avoids because they can't stand the conflict. They need to get away. They need space. And the space turns into avoidance, right? Space is okay. Don't ever let an abusive partner tell you that you don't deserve space and that other people can use withdrawal. People can use withdrawal and space abusively too. Like if a husband decides he's just going to get angry and not help wife out with a newborn, like just go, we know we can talk about when withdrawal becomes a weapon, when you're freezing someone out and stonewalling them, because that can happen. But of cooling down during an argument is not the same thing. So just to get that out there before anyone says, well, what if somebody's avoiding, and it's for safety. I'm totally exempting that. If that's the concern, you've gone beyond a conversation about attachment to a conversation about safety. So that's a whole different thing. So anxious attachment gets into, what do you do when you're upset during conflict? You cling, you want to work it out, you want to talk. So there you go. So somebody with avoidant attachment, rather than talking with their husband about the relationship, is going to want to peace out, not think about it. And I'm not saying people with avoidant attachment are more likely to cheat at all. I'm saying if you don't address it, anyone with any kind of attachment pathology is going to be more likely to cheat or seek that comfort out elsewhere if they're not being honest with themselves and talking it out.
Yeah. And yeah, I suppose I think that if in any of those articles where they talk about cheating, they could just address what some of the problems were instead of, like you said, turning into, oh, I always knew we were going to cheat, or I always knew something was going to happen. If at least they could discuss something more than just saying, this happened, it's not my fault, okay, goodbye.
So large mistakes are usually the culmination of many smaller ones.
Yeah, I could see that.
So cheating is usually the culmination of a lot of small concessions to allow yourself to be tempted. And it's like, you can find other people attractive when you're married or when you're in a relationship. That's ridiculous. Your brain, if you might spot someone and glance them, right? But are you, like, if you linger on that, are mentally or visually or whatever, it's like, okay, so what is that indicative of? What level of fantasizing and escapism do you have for your relationship? Why are you in it at that point? Why don't you want to talk about it? All questions to consider, right? But the cheating thing keeps coming up in some of your videos, and I really enjoy it because it's validating for me, because I see a lot of these articles from different outlets. We millennials got to start gatekeeping on relationship stuff too, and not let the most voraciously entitled narcissists dictate what the narrative is on relationships, because that's what's happening. It's becoming what I deserve. A relationship is not what I deserve. It's what we can do together.
Well, yeah, I completely agree, which is why I hate magazines like Cosmopolitan, because they
imagine. Yeah. Okay.
all of that. So I feel like I just feel like they take a very strange stance in terms of all of that, which is why I don't really support it, because they just seem a little too open to everything, which is a problem in my opinion. Like, not everything is meant to be accepted.
So in our swipe-based culture, you can look at I've given this some thought, right? There's some reasons. With the amazing appearance of so many options, including false options too, like fake profiles and whatever, it's like it becomes incumbent and almost an urge in the face of such overpowering, noisy options to start making up ways to cut people out. And so to say, oh, this tattoo is terrible, oh, it's like, okay, so many guys in the DMs, what am I going to do? Okay, look at the tattoo. That's one perspective on it. And then we got to get realistic about, it's okay to take a breath, take a step back from online dating, not feel like you have to reply to everything right away, or even take a step away from dating. But when you start seeing the extreme pickiness of this level, it almost seems like just anything that can help to say, well, what is something that matters to me? And another thing I just thought of that you'll probably agree on, it's like, if you don't have any values as a human being, first of all, that's dangerous. Second of all, you have to start arbitrarily coming up with these things. So it's like, well, how good are his tattoos?
Yeah.
Really? Is that like, what is that? But if you don't have anything but that, it makes total sense, right? If everything is appearance, if everything is some sort of litmus test on coolness or aesthetics, then it would make sense that you need to find some more gatekeeping procedures for that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I know that even on Cosmopolitan, there are plenty of articles about, like, if he responds to your DM or your message in such and such way, it means XYZ, when most of these responses are very basic. So it's like, if you ask, hey, how are you? And he responds, well, how about you? They're going to come up with this massive, significant, mystical meaning, when really it's not that deep. It's just a response, but it goes back to what you were saying, where it's like, let's find a way to eliminate people quickly.
Right. And so it also plays an insecurity, where the more insecure about ambiguous stimuli, the more you want to read into stuff, and magazines and life coaches and people who have a vested interest in telling you what to think will seize on that. So anytime you're anxious about something and you have to look outside for answers, that source of answers better be damn good, or you're going to get steered in the wrong direction. And that's how people get really shitty generational advice from parents. They get really lame directions from friends. If all your friends tell you that every guy you've dated isn't good enough for you and you regret it and you felt like some guys really were, take a look at your friends, by the way, because there's some communities of friends where they'll just like bash anybody that you date. Like, obviously friends are a great vetting procedure for guys that are abusive. Like, I can't tell you how grateful I am that some of my clients had friends or family that helped them get safety from domestic abuse. So that's an example. That's an extreme example. But if you've got friends who are actually even jealous that you're with someone or who keep telling you he's not good enough, it's like, well, why? Well, because ... Maybe, for your first Valentine's Day, he didn't get you a car or something worth thousands. Okay. That's a little rough. And you see this stuff on Twitter. You'll see stuff like, I saw one tweet recently that just blew my mind that said, if you're not planning to take me to dinner, this, that, and the other thing, and pay for childcare for my son, what are you even doing? We don't need to go on a date. My ex and I already have a hard time. Like, it's like something that was saying, I don't know if you saw this, but it was talking about, like, you better be ready to pay for everything so I don't have to bother my ex-man with this. And it's like, well, for one thing, why don't y'all just get back together if you respect him that much? And I don't mean that rude. I mean, why are you out here teaming up with him to get some dude to pay for you shit?
Yeah, I've seen tweets like that.
Yeah.
Well, and I've seen a lot of tweets even that have these like grandiose ideas of how first dates should be and stuff like that. And it's fine to have your own preferences or like your own ideal first date or Valentine's date, whatever. But some of them I feel like are so all or nothing, where they expect the partner or whoever they're going on a date with to know automatically without telling them.
Well, so that's mind reading. And the problem is, so that's like a cognitive fallacy that CBT talks about. And there's this, and I've had to talk with a lot of clients about this, about what's reasonable to expect from your significant other. Well, when it gets to that point, you're using that word, then it's more reasonable to expect stuff like that. They'll remember that you're allergic to peanuts, for God's sake, right? It's like, well, that's not mind reading. However, on a first date, anything and everything would be mind reading at that point, depending on how long you've spoken on Tinder in the DMs or in text messaging or Snapchat or whatever. Okay, fine. If you've kind of on the front end gotten to know each other and he doesn't remember something very important, or you've dropped so many hints, you said so many things. I mean, hints is a tough one too. But it's so many things about what you're interested in doing, and he or she doesn't plan that. Okay, well, you've got somebody who maybe doesn't listen well. Maybe they were busy when they read the messages. But when you expect someone to do something with giving no forward information, it's almost delusional thinking where you expect them to be in your mind.
Yeah,
in a way.
I completely agree, and that's why it's frustrating too, because a lot of the tone of a lot of those tweets is that it was so obvious, when in reality, who would have known unless you said something?
Well, the more narcissistic someone is, the more they assume everyone will know what they want. And this is an interesting one. You can use this. The more narcissistic somebody is, the longer they can talk without looking for or eliciting a response from the person listening.
I'm going to write that one down. I'm going to need it.
You will. I was just thinking about this last night. So I was thinking about how I had this phone call one time and I kept trying to interject because I really had some stuff to share that would have been helpful. And the person kept cutting it off and going on. And I started playing around with it, and not at all in an inappropriate way. Like, I was trying to talk, and every time I was getting cut off. And so I just decided to wait till they were done. Right. Well, I actually waited so long, and it was just there was no coming up for air. And it wasn't a crisis situation where I needed to call like emergency services. It was just a day-to-day thing. And I noticed I could have driven to McDonald's and come back. I wouldn't have done that, but it was so shocking. I thought that could have even been possible when you're on the phone with someone what I meant is I could have left my office desk phone there and driven and left and not even given any brief verbal kind of or verbal indication of understanding, right? Kind of those little space holder things like, oh yeah, those kind of things. So when you get that, it's like, okay, who are you really talking to? Are you talking to me, or are you talking to yourself and you need an audience for? It's very interesting when you start to look at that.
Yeah, I know I've tested stuff like that myself with certain people that just go off. Like they'll, like, not even because they're angry, like not a rant, not a crisis, just generally. And I'll put the phone on mute so I can like wash the dishes and just like do things around the house. And like I'll notice that with most people, if I put it on mute when I'm making noise, I'll have to take it off and be like, yeah, I'm still listening. Go ahead, continue. And then I'll put it back on mute so I don't have to hear the noise. But with certain people, I can just clean my whole house and I'll never have to press on the unmute because they're still going. And I listened to all of it, but it's jarring to think like I could have died and they would have no idea, like, because they don't ask for any response.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and I think to an extent that's understandable. I get, like, if somebody needs someone to bear witness after something terrible they've been through, so be it. Right. I completely understand and empathize with that. I would say, though, that a lot of times trauma survivors that I've worked with, actually, when they're telling their narrative, they are like, oh, does this make sense? Or I can't believe this, what's happened. Like, there's a lot of questioning too, and reality testing, trying to understand what happened, which is why it's so important you have somebody who's listening and is a good responsive therapist. But anyway, so ranting usually comes out of anger, and there's kind of rants where you just want somebody to hear it, and that's fine. But again, if you're not ever coming up for air, it means you're in your limbic system and you're not in the frontal lobe, and you're not thinking about the other person at all. You're so immersed, and you're not thinking, should I ask this person how they're doing?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. That's why I made a note, because I recognize that in a certain amount of people I know.
Well, I mean, this is why I am doing podcasting and doing YouTube stuff, because there's enough out there that tells you the same typical stuff. And I was in school doing rounds and interning and all that stuff, and didn't have time to start a channel or start spreading this to people who need to hear it. Now that I'm up and running, it's easier to do it. But it's fascinating how simple you can start measuring some of this stuff, but you just don't hear about it because a lot of this stuff is behind the paywall of academia, right? Like, a lot of jobs like this are locked behind a paywall where you just have to go and listen to stuff and sit through it and be able to regurgitate it to prove that you're, smart enough. And then you can start doing your own thing.
Yeah, I feel this about English academia. It's the same. Yep.
Oh my God. I enjoyed listening to your stories about how someone was offended that the author spoke from a dog's perspective.
Yeah, I feel like that particular person is the whole reason why I had to take a gap year, because I was like, the prospect of having to deal with this person or someone similar, no, absolutely not. But the thing was, like, it wasn't even just them. It was a vast majority, strangely enough. Like, it was extremely jarring, especially you'd expect with graduate students that you're okay with challenging people's opinions. Mm-hmm. That's what I thought. It turns out, no, not these people, not this particular group of people, and not that specific person.
Well, all I have to say, and this goes for anybody, and this is a good litmus test, you can get offended for dogs. You can get offended on their behalf, especially if dogs are being abused, and you can go lobby for better animal cruelty laws. But to offend a real living, breathing human by taking up for dogs, the dogs probably wouldn't want that from you. I don't know. Whatever, man. I don't know the phenomenology of being a dog, but I would assume, since how warm they are to human beings and how loving, I wouldn't assume that a dog would want you to offend someone taking up for them for a hypothetical slight. So it's an empathy cop-out. Be more empathic to people you're talking to than by bringing up hypothetical points to argue with them. That's not empathic. That's trying to gatekeep and carve out a niche for yourself as a contrarian.
Yeah, that was my class in a nutshell. So.
Well, I have to say, I've never heard of a white knight for a dog. I mean, that's a next level white knight.
To be honest, I kind of have a theory that if I said it, he automatically disagreed. So I could say the sky is blue and he would disagree because I said it. So I think it was like a personal, like,
yeah,
nemesis situation.
Well, it's a socially acceptable way to say fuck you. I mean, and I think that it's so transparent too. I'm amazed how people think they're being so clever and being rude. Legitimately, they're usually not. It's usually pretty on the nose. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. So I want to give a shout out to you and Jacob, the power couple, doing God's work out there, bringing light to obscure conspiracy theories and shit. Not so obscure, I guess. But like
some of them, I suppose, a bit more than others. Yeah.
Because for me, the DIA one, Mephisto's Corner, episode 2, everybody, if you're looking to listen, which you should, the DIA. So everybody who I think I've said this quite a few times in my show, I'm living in Colorado. I'm pretty close to DIA, actually, as we speak. I'm over here kind of on the south outskirts of Denver. So, God, when I came out here as a Southern boy back in the 2000s, boy, was I shocked to see that green Nazi on that dang wall.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It was so, and as someone who's somewhat aesthetically minded, I have to say, God, it was ugly.
Yeah.
Hell, how ugly. Like, it's a regurgitated sort of, you know how when you're learning to paint, potentially, and like you combine all the colors by accident, you get this horrible mud green brown. That's that fucking mural. So
yeah, that's true.
You get like this, oops, I combined all the colors. Here we go. Like what you're actually supposed to do is start over when you do that. But anyway, so that was a good exploration. Guess you learned a lot about that, huh?
That mural reminds me kind of like a perverse or tragic version of It's a Small World After All, like the Disney.
Yeah.
It just reminded me of that, but like in a horrible way. And I don't understand who would pay for that. Like,
so I'm going to tread lightly, being an adopted Denverite, I guess you could say, adopted Coloradan, but the rustic sort of Western aesthetic is not particularly my favorite. So, you know, that's just, well, yeah, you've got like the cool green, like slime core aesthetic. Like
slime core.
Yeah, have you ever heard of that? Like, it's like vaporwave. It's like sea punk.
Yeah, I love vaporwave too.
I was talking to my coworker the other day who works in the med department, a nurse, talking about vaporwave because she likes to combine pastel blue and pastel pink. It's like, where are my keys? There's a point to that. She was combining them. She's like, here's what my room looks like. I'm like, that's freaking amazing. But like the pink on my iPhone case, sorry for podcast listeners, watch the video. But the combining with like that baby blue and then the pastel pink is so damn cool. I would do that in my office, but I don't think a lot of the people over 30 something would probably get that it's not old, that it's supposed to look new. So that's where I'm going to go gold and marble. It's like, that's timeless.
Yeah, that is truly timeless.
But
you can put whatever you want with it. Like you could put any color of furniture, really.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. But vaporwave and sea punk is great. I mean, I love the greens and the blues. It's very calming.
Yeah, I think that's why I like both of those aesthetics. They're nice to look at and not overwhelming. Contrary to the wall in the DIA with all the shit on it, the Nazi, the everything.
Preferably when you arrive on a mass form of transit where you feel packed in with a bunch of bodies, you don't want to think it's Nazis moving you around. I'm just going to go there. I'm just going to say that.
Well, and then the idea is like when you're surrounded by everyone or when you're late for a flight, and most people don't like airports. Most people I know don't feel good in airports. To see a mural like that doesn't necessarily give me a happy vibe of like everything's okay. It makes me feel on edge. I'm like, why is this mural here? What does this mean?
Well, it's just interesting because just the whoever sees that and thinks, yes, this is fine. It's like, why'd you think it? Because everyone's not an artist. For God's sake, do I know that? But I mean, you don't have to be an artist to get a disquieting vibe off of someone wearing a gas mask with angry eyes and a sword. So I think whoever greenlit that just said, oh, well, we get the story and it means something beautiful and look at the children singing at his defeat. It's like, don't show that fight, though. Just show the happy kids. Show the aftermath after you defeat the faceless zombie. That's the Nazi. That's the way to go.
Well, and then it's also there's I can't remember the name of like the big blue horse thingy.
Lucifer, because I'm looking at it. I took notes on that. Lucifer, or what is it? No, that's the punk. That's the damn Aftermath name.
Yeah, but even just prior to what happened there, I also thought that was unsettling.
So here's the problem with that. That is connected to, let's see, Blue Mustang. Is this Blue Mustang? Wow, what a nondescript name. Of course, Lucifer caught on more. Jesus.
Yeah,
okay, cast fiberglass sculpture of a Mustang. Yeah, that's, well, and there's a lot of stories where the entity kills its creator, right? So that's horrific, and I'm sorry it happened. And the eyes. If you just left out the red eyes, right?
Well, the thing is, when I look at the big picture of what DIA is like, it makes me feel like you're landing in some kind of underworld by being greeted by this massive blue Mustang, and then you go in and it's like the hounds are there, but it's just this ugly mural. And then you have, well, when they were doing when there was like works in progress and they had all the like things that said the reptilians, or like they were, the DIA was kind of in on it.
Yeah, I don't like leaning into that. That's not my thing. Yeah.
I think part of it was funny with the talking gargoyle who had a suitcase. I actually liked that one because it was creeping people out and it was like a prank. That was funny, but everything together would not make me feel good about being there. Everything together. Also, the fact that it has underground tunnels that aren't being used, but they spent millions of dollars on. It's too suspicious to me. Like, I'm not saying that aliens are there. I'm just saying I don't understand why they spent money in the way they did.
You got me. It's very interesting. I mean, it's horrific that you'd be killed that way by some falling mass from your own horse. I don't know. I don't know how that happened. But yeah, I remember getting here and with a fresh visitor's eyes, because this stuff was still here. And I thought, yep, this is what we're doing now. I mean, and then the land near DIA is brown scorched earth that looks post-apocalyptic. So you add on to this atmosphere that's already slightly discomforting. So it's fine. Everything's fine. But the gargoyles and the suitcase, I love how you and Jacob's dynamic where he'll say something and you'll slightly respond with like an almost audible eye roll. I love it. It is so great.
It is. That's exactly how it is in real life. Yep.
And he'd be like, I'm just going to say that this thing is leaping out and and it's a portal system. And you're like, oh, you mean the Harry Potter thing? And he's like, yes, yeah. No, it's not what I mean.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. He loves to reference Harry Potter at any given time.
Oh, by the way, Harry Potter's not a personality trait, everybody. I can't wait to get death threats for this one. But I'm kidding. But Harry Potter is not sufficient to make a personality.
Yeah, I'd say that also goes for Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings is just Narnia, but written with more lore.
Yeah.
Because those dudes were friends. And, C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien, both Christian authors, both kind of alive at the same time. Tolkien, I wrote a paper about him in my bachelor's degree program. I wrote about him kind of having in the trenches experiences with his brethren and how that influenced a lot of his themes of loyalty in The Hobbit and in Lord of the Rings. And then mysteriously, I didn't fucking obsess about it for 15 years because I haven't been out of school that long, but it's like it's amazing to me. It's like that goes to the fiction. Oh, this loops right back around to should you make fictional people, like identifying with fictional people? Yeah, but make it general. Have your life be your quest. You are your own character. You make up your own stats, right? Which are roughly related to what you're good at and what you want to grow in. Do it that way. Gamify your own life. Don't try to be Frodo for a multitude of reasons. Please do not try to live out Lord of the Rings. But if that's your starting point and your way of understanding the hero's journey, which is like the analog for our lives, fine. That's fine. But people cling on to this stuff. And that's why I think people were so shocked that Game of Thrones didn't turn out the way they wanted it to.
You mean the last season or what?
100% the last season, yes.
Oh, yeah. Everyone I know hated it.
Well, and I think there's reasons for that. And I think they have legitimate reasons because people saw and you don't have to be a feminist to see that what they did with Daenerys kind of cheapened her character in a way that as a actual, not to pull up like a cliche, but she was a strong female character with vulnerabilities, but who, you know, needed like, but she went completely ridiculous. And it almost was an insult to mental illness, our side of Westeros, because it's like, it doesn't excuse, like they made it be her trauma. And it's like, well, her character had been, you can't develop someone's character and identity and strength in themselves that much and then have them regress that much. It doesn't work that way. It would be actually a regression throughout several seasons versus a snapping effect, in my opinion.
I didn't really follow it as much as other people.
Yeah.
But
that was one of the few shows I actually kept up with that I thought was pretty interesting.
yeah, I suppose I'm not very much a fantasy type person, but
Believe me, I'm not either.
but
I don't
what
like
did
Lord of the
follow-
Rings that much.
No, me neither. I remember one of the only reasons I first watched it was because of Orlando Bloom's character. That was the only reason I went to see it in the movie theaters when it came out, when I was like probably too young to watch it, but that was it.
Well, you know, it's funny that you say that because Legolas was a real hit with the ladies, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, and you like Geralt too, right? Like you said something about gray-haired,
Yeah.
long-haired dudes.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I think most women identify with that. I really truly do.
It's funny because there should be some kind of study done on women who prefer bald dudes versus dudes with long hair. That would be I really think you would find like a hormonal difference based in the women based on their preference, because men that are bald have an overwhelming amount of testosterone. They're usually like square jawed, and there's kind of that whole thing. Like you could almost like, it gets very down the rabbit hole on like emergent evolutionary neuroscience stuff, but like there's probably a reason for the preference, I would bet. Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, I think at least on my end, because I know that my friends and I stand very much on the same page, it's also about the fact that on a day-to-day basis, is there a high likelihood that you're going to come across multiple men who have long hair that's white or gray, unless they're like a weird hippie grandpa? Like, it's probably not really going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of it for a lot of people is an element of like, not supernatural, but maybe elvish or something that's not of the real world. I don't know.
Sure. No, that's great. That's a very good theoretical conjecture there.
That being said, I don't know anyone who prefers bald people as like a particular preference.
It's like I had a boss. That's not at all what you call representative sample, but I had a boss who was wild about that. It was really funny to hear. Yeah, you hear a lot of stuff working in this field.
I'm sure.
Well, some of it's good. Some of it I'd actually learned something. Anyway.
That's a surprising positive.
You know, everybody has to pick their poison with what they want to do in mental health. For me, trauma is just the best to work with because there's such a high prognosis, such a tall ceiling, right? You could reach anything with trauma if you just help the person to desensitize their triggers and get rid of them and reprocess it. Okay, I'm safe. I'm here. It's done. It's like addiction stuff. You're working with complete relapse constantly, which is more of a burnout to me than it would be to hear horrible stories. Because I know that this is not the end of my client's story. This is a spot along the path, right? To use that journey metaphor. So you just got to determine what your burnout point is and pivot away from that.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And
it's kind of what you do with your videos. You said it's like one of them you had to take off the air. It's like, okay, I'm not going to do that. It's a little too much.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with a lot of, it's harder to see these people that I talk about as like a chapter, because most of the time they'll talk about they did their crime and then they go missing and you don't know what happened. So they could reform for all you know, but you'll never hear about that.
That's tough when there's no end to the story. No, I get it. I'm talking about people's personal trauma. But when you're being like a pain eater or like a sin eater, in other words, for the community of like internalizing all these stories and telling people about it, that takes a lot of like recognizing you can't do anything about it. It's okay. You've done what you could. You've brought attention to it. You've boosted the signal on YouTube. Okay, done.
Yeah.
That's what I did. Anyway. Yeah, the ongoing thing about that family where the woman thinks that she's the reincarnation of Jesus.
You see she got arrested?
Did she? No, it's so much to keep up with. Tell me about that.
So I didn't really read the articles yet, but I got so many messages this morning and yesterday telling me that she got arrested and she has a bail of $5 million, I believe it is.
Okay.
And I think she got a couple counts of like child endangerment or desertion of a child or children.
Oh, wow.
So she's in a serious amount of trouble at this point, rightfully so. It's about time.
I don't think she's winning Mom of the Year award.
No, considering that she might be murderer Mom of the Year, we'll see. But I
really
think something.
sorry for that.
I just think something bad is coming this way with her.
Something wicked this way comes, you're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
there's no one who has a family with that many deaths randomly.
I know. That's bizarre that wasn't on the radar before. I mean,
You'd think.
You would. The nanny who had a child with the boy she babysat was especially disturbing to me.
Yeah, me too. Anything that has to do with adults being responsible for children and then something perverse happening.
Yeah. So you've talked a lot about your heart for excuse me, let me reverse that statement. About your heart for victims of female abuse.
Yeah.
That strikes me. That's really the Lord's work out here, that you're bringing a lot of attention to double standards and to the fact that it's still abuse. And that's one of the big reasons I wanted to interview you, because that's such a unique proposition on a YouTube channel about abuse.
Well, it's actually kind of funny because since I was a kid, apparently, allegedly, according to my family, I've had this weird, I don't want to say obsession because that sounds unhealthy, but this weird kind of looking out towards pedophiles, I suppose you could say. Sure. And my aunt always said, she's like, you're making a career out of like looking into pedophiles. And this is before I even started a YouTube channel. So it's ironic now because yeah, that's essentially a lot of the bulk. But I noticed that in a lot of articles or videos that I saw where the predator was a woman, right, there was just an endless stream of comments of usually men saying, he's a young boy, he would have enjoyed it, or he's lucky, or I wish that had happened. I wish that was my first time. Just these comments just like projecting, I guess, what they think is hot. I genuinely don't know, but
fantasy elements that they now in an adult mind believe they would have viewed the same way as a child, which they wouldn't have. Is what you're saying. No,
and of course, if we flip the gender, then they surely wouldn't have been happy because then they would have been like, that could have been my daughter. So
of course, which again is project. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're transferring that. Yeah, transference.
But more than anything, it's because I continue, even to this day on my channel, seeing comments saying, women cannot assault people or women cannot rape people, whatever the stupid claim is. And it concerns me because it gives this false sense of security that any woman who you hire, by definition, cannot be dangerous, which is a scary precedent because, I mean, it's just like, then are you just going to let in any woman into your house because you have this belief that they can't do any harm? And then that ends up, and then it's the children paying for that. It's not the adult.
Yeah. So this gets into the whore Madonna complex thing where it's like guys splitting their vision of women according to like the divine feminine and then this dirtier figure. So that's a very crude way of describing it, but it was kind of a big thing in the psychology literature. I see this in a lot of male clients where, and I will get back to the thing about female abusers, but a lot of male clients going through divorces or otherwise dealing with women who were not exactly saints. And it's like their narrative growing up is what you said. They were kind of taught that women, anything they do is excusable because of their emotional capacity, which is itself very sexist presupposition. But you get these ideas, like these men who think that women are essentially sex and support dispensers, that if they act crazy from time to time, well, that's just how they are, quote. That is really a horrific way to look at it because it makes it simultaneously is offensive to women and it opens you up as a guy to be really screwed over. So like teaching men, okay, this is what's acceptable and what's not. You're making excuses, whatever. that's a lot of deprogramming that I have to do, especially if they grew up with like an alcoholic mother or something where they had to learn that they, as a young boy, were kind of the white knight and the rescuer. That really screws men up and rewires their attraction to go for women who like need help. Not to be rude, but so yeah. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, and I suppose it's also because in my family is essentially all women because I have a tiny family. It's my mom and my aunt, and then that's it.
Right.
So our family is all women.
Okay.
My dad was never part of the picture, so I suppose there never really was a narrative about gender, female or male. It was all the same. The narrative was condensed because it was just us women. We never made rules for men, and we never made rules for ourselves. So there never was a thing of, oh, women cannot be criminal, abusive, whatever the case is. And so I guess because of that, when I see people giving those excuses, I'm like, well, no, that's not acceptable either.
Okay. Wow. That makes a lot of sense. And it speaks to the point, like growing up in the South, my mom was like a Southern belle type, very feminine. And she, of course, had 2 sons, my brother and I. It was very funny. And so she just learned, go hiking, do this stuff. Not go crazy with it, but she was also very good at explaining kind of the world of women. And I mean, maybe I had an advantage too, because like seeing the way there's the kind of front facing, like bless your heart, niceness, and then backstabbing way of talking behind. Again, not to be sexist, men can do that, of course. So I thought about this question because so many of your videos have to do with calling out and raising awareness for male abuse and the fact that boys, like you even, which I really appreciate, your English literature master's level stuff, like your English master's coming into play where you're looking at the language of the articles and it says, seems weird not to use the word rape and to say began a sexual relationship, you said, in reference to the woman beginning one with the boy, which of course, as we know, led to the conception of the boy's son, right? The nanny. We're talking about the nanny who began a sexual relationship with the boy. And it's like, well, even in the writing, that dignifies it as a consensual thing. So even though this is very wrong and very grotesque, so content warning, I thought about it, and the nature of male sexuality, the arousal is more obvious with men and boys. And so in order to maintain that arousal and impregnate, it's a heavy kind of emphasis on the male arousal response, right? And so culturally, we just kind of take for granted, like if he's turned on, if he, completes the act and she becomes pregnant, well, that's consensual because his body was saying yes to this. And I think that's very, very shaky, to say the least. It's extremely shaky and fuzzy logic because you look at it and some female rape survivors, again, like rape and orgasm are not mutually exclusive. And
I read about that. Yeah.
And it's horrifying. I've worked with survivors who are disgusted that their body betrayed them. And I'll leave it at that. But again, it's the body brain connection, and your body is doing things as a young boy, young girl, or whatever, in response to this stimulus that it's getting. And you might not be ready for it. And it doesn't mean it wasn't rape because someone manipulated your body into arousal, full stop. I mean, but I think culturally we see the male arousal response as the potent impregnating force. And so if an older woman arouses that in a boy, well, he's a man then, right? Because he can impregnate her. He's doing that. And so we need to address that in an open way. I don't hear that being spoken about a lot. Now, it's not good dinner conversation, but when your channel addresses this stuff, it's like, it really makes me think about how far we have to go with explaining these things that should kind of just be, if you think about it enough, it comes to mind pretty easily. It's not rocket science. No, it's not. And then in the end, it's really just a basic thing of no matter what gender they are or identify with, if they're a minor, they're a minor. Like that's really it. If they're a minor, it shouldn't be that much more complicated if they can't. It really shouldn't. It shouldn't. And I wish it wasn't, but clearly it is when you've got men saying, I wish that was me. Well, now Joe Bob at 50 from Facebook commenting with your from the neck up photo, which I don't know why that's such a thing. It's like, yeah, that's your response now, reasoning from a grown man brain. And you're remembering childhood through that filter. Then you don't understand how terrifying it would be when you didn't even know what sex was then. Yeah, 100%. And I think that's why it frustrates me as well, because when I see those comments, first of all, I just wonder if like they
didn't watch the video, because or else they wouldn't say, like, there's no real response that you can say to that, because it's like, if I explain it to you and you don't get it, I can't do more for you.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's where, and see, this gets into the issue of, I don't think always court-ordered therapy or things like that. You can make someone sit through stuff and listen to it, and I'm all for it if it can penetrate their mind at all. But raising awareness and empathy in people, they have to be willing to entertain the idea that they have something to learn.
Yeah.
And they have to be willing to step away from the jokes and the defense mechanisms and the kind of black and white, oh, it's not rape, it's a woman. I get it. If you're horny and you're a guy and you're jealous that a kid's having sex, you got a fucking problem. But that's what it is. And you need to call it for that. So, but if you're not willing to, and you've got that narcissistic block to any self-exploration, people like that have to just kind of be avoided. I mean, I say that as a therapist because, again, people who are coming in for therapy, or a lot of them are narcissistic abuse survivors because they want to get better. It's like that paradox of awareness that the more you know about yourself, the more you think there is to change just because you're seeing it. You're not willfully ignorant. And I talk about this a lot with clients. It's like, okay, you think that you're a basket of nerves, you think you're a bundle of nerves, and you think you're a hot mess. But that's because you're looking inward so much. Your friends, people around who you idealize so much and who may be a little more charismatic and narcissistic, it's like they're not looking into themselves that much, or they're not sharing it with you, right? So it's like, start noticing that awareness and willingness to change is the solution itself. It's great.
Yeah, I definitely, I feel that. I've experienced that. And I know some of my friends who are self-aware the most, who are, I suppose, having these long lists of things they have to change about themselves or need to improve on.
Right. Well, for sure. I mean, just the list itself, any way that you can move that toward being that ideal self, just a little bit a day, without getting overwhelmed. I mean, that's truly the way forward.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. I completely agree.
change is often very boring and gradual. That's the sad part. And we go circle back to life coaching. And it's like anyone telling you need to walk across hot coals or do some kind of a trust fall thing, it feels good. And you can do commemorative rituals. Rituals are an innate part of human culture beyond the religious. If you don't believe that, look at the 12-step program. I mean, that has an infusion of a higher power. I get it. But even in trying to create secular things, there's these rites of passage. Well, why is that? Because they encode into your memory that you're leaving the old you behind. And that's a beautiful thing. I agree with that. But you also have to realize that the day in, day out change is where a lot of that's going to get done. And commemorate that. Look at that. Have each day be a ritual of growth, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I really want to respect your time. This has been really, really awesome. Thank you so much again for coming.
No, thank you for having me on. It was super interesting to hear from someone who actually, knows what they're talking about with this, contrary to Cosmo or whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's so cool because like watching your videos, I remember I just started watching you before even thinking to have you on. I was enjoying your stuff like the way I would enjoy any video. It's very surreal to think, okay, and now she has her DMs open on Twitter. I'm going to say, hey, I mean, how about having a dialogue? I mean, that's one great thing about the internet is it connects to people that you might otherwise not meet. That's a good positive thing about it.
No, 100%. And that's one of the first things I mention when people try to demonize the internet, saying it's making everyone depressed. And there are plenty of terrible things about the internet, of course, but that's one of the first things I bring up, that there's a bridge now between everyone. Like, from normal people to, I know people who have DM'd some of their favorite celebrities and gotten a response, and it's like made their day.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah.
So like it goes from like smaller connections to like the crazier ones that you wouldn't ever assume. And it's nice because there's a feeling of community, even though like people who have nothing to do with each other can still talk, which is cool.
I love it. So as we wind down here, I want to ask you something. Mm-hmm. Who are 3 people that you would meet if you could meet anybody living or dead? I love to ask guests that. I totally flew past that because we had so much other stuff to talk about. But like, they can be living or dead. They just have to be real. It can't be fictional.
Okay. As a number 1, I'd say Charles Bukowski, because I wrote my thesis on him. And I
love his poetry.
Yeah, me too. I have for a really long time. That's why I wrote my master's thesis on him, because apparently nobody's written about him. Kind of crazy, but there were like there's like next to no academia. So,
wow.
Bukowski, I've always been slightly obsessed with Shakespeare, so I'll put him down.
Love
Not
him.
very creative. Not
Love
very
him.
creative, that one. Yeah, I'd want some answers about certain things.
No, nobody has said that on my show yet, and I've had like at least over 20 some episodes, so it's not that. That is
Okay,
pretty
well,
creative.
that's a plus. That's a plus.
Love him. Okay.
And then probably Freddie Mercury.
Solid.
Yeah, all icons.
So, do you have a favorite Shakespeare play? Because I've got like two.
Yeah, the depressed person in me says Hamlet, and the dramatic person in me says Twelfth Night. How about you?
Well, I absolutely love Richard III because I had a Shakespeare class in college that was taught by like a really accomplished, awesome instructor, professor about a history of Shakespeare stuff. And across English literature, Richard III was one of the first villains who was self-reflective and who gave a reason for his villainy, like that he was crippled and he felt overlooked and he was shamed for being kind of an uglier member of society. And it's like, well, duh, what is that? Well, before then, a lot of plays had people be evil because they were just from hell, or it was just the devil, right? They didn't have a causative nature where it went into like an actual protagonist villain who is sympathetic. So the mark of like the beginning, the inception of the sympathetic villain, I just have to say Richard III, especially because he's usually portrayed as pretty charismatic. Have you seen the adaptation where he's played by Ian McKellen?
Yes.
Oh my God. Delightful. Fucking love that. I think King Lear's awesome, especially if you want to talk about family trauma and opportunistic kids. I really like Macbeth as well because you've got the weird witchcraft element and you've got the kind of, so listen, M. Night Shyamalan's got nothing on Shakespeare because the twist of a man not of woman born, that Macduff was delivered by cesarean section, so he wasn't technically born. Like it's like Macbeth felt confident that he wouldn't be defeated because no man isn't born of woman. Aha, there's a loophole. It's like that was probably one of the earliest twist endings if you think about it. I don't know. I'm sure you could go back to like Beowulf and some shit. Maybe not. That's kind of straightforward to me. Beowulf, just the language in it is obscure, but
yeah, I think that's like the bulk of what Beowulf is like decrypting everything that's said and finding out that it's not that serious.
Fight a monster, fight the monster's mom. Well, then you get into like some incel son who doesn't leave the nest stuff. Oh my God, what a paper that would be.
I'm sure some incel probably has written about it on his like on Reddit or something.
Incel stuff is tough because it's a chicken and egg thing. It's like, dude, you got to get over what you think about society. Go hit the gym, hit the speech therapy. Like go to Toastmasters, get some lessons in talk and speaking well. Go to a therapist. How about that? I mean, yeah, it can suck for men, and it doesn't mean all women are terrible. Maybe you think, maybe you're attracted, maybe your attraction wiring is off. But anyway, God, that's some awesome picks. Freddie Mercury, because it's very nostalgic for you, his music, right?
Yeah. And then like I think there's some things that even in a lot of biopics, even like Bohemian Rhapsody, some of the stuff in it, I wasn't mad about it, but there's a part in Bohemian Rhapsody where he breaks up with his girlfriend and she's like, you're gay, and it's like,
oh no. Yeah.
He was bi. People knew. Like it's just like there was a lot of information that I wish I could talk to him about just to get it from like the horse's mouth, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff that we have wrong.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting. And like I've seen some of his interviews and he's so carefree a lot of the time in a way that I'm jealous of, because it just seems like he's like, I'm good. Like it's been a good day. Fuck the haters. It's all good. And I like that energy. So I think it'd be interesting to see firsthand what that would feel like to interact with someone like that.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay. We'll wrap it up now. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm going to stop recording. All right. This is awesome.
Yeah.